Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I've got a really sweet one for you. So, over the weekend I played in the Arena Coliseum Timeless 1K tournament. So, this was a tournament put together by the same crew that did the Creator Clash the week before, and this was by far the biggest Timeless tournament that we've seen to date. We had over 90 players in it, and the field was really stacked as well. We had a lot of really strong players in it, and I managed to get top 4 with an updated version of Natural Order Titans. So, I was 3rd place going to the top 8, and then unfortunately lost in the semi-finals to Jund, lost to Nicole, who ended up taking down the whole tournament, but they played incredibly well. So obviously always going to be tantalizing to get so close and not being able to win it, but you know, I haven't played in a third party tournament outside of stuff like the qualifiers and the Arena Opens in over 3 years at this point, you know, since back when Channel Fireball and SCG were doing their events during COVID. So I'm really happy with the top 4 finish, and the deck felt really strong as well. Now, before I get into the changes that I made to the deck, I want to give a quick shout out to Anu, Will, and the whole crew that put this tournament together, because it was so much fun to play. The tournament went really smoothly, the staff were really helpful, the games were really, really interesting. So I definitely advise, you know, if they run timeless tournaments again, which I think they said they were interested in doing, I definitely recommend, you know, entering yourself if you're interested in playing some high-level timeless. I'll leave a link down to Anu's Twitter in the description if you want to check that out. But anyway, with that all out of the way, let's have a look at the changes that I've made to this list. So I'm not going to explain how the whole deck works, because I've already got a full deck guide video on this. So if you're not familiar with this deck, I'll leave a link down to my deck guide in the description, which has a full breakdown of how the deck works and explains all the card choices. But basically, in a very simplistic sense, we're trying to get Primeval Titan into play on turn 3 or 4 as consistently as possible to get Fielded Dead online, and then the rest of the deck is basically built to maximize that game plan. So the only change that I've made to the main deck since my last update in the tier list video is I replaced a Brushland with a Westvale Abbey. So this is a really interesting addition to the deck. The main ability we're interested in here is the ability to pay 5 and tap it and sack 5 creatures to transform it into this 9/7 flying lifelink indestructible haste. So the play pattern with this card is, if we get Primeval Titan into play on turn 3 or 4, we want to be fetching Westvale Abbey and another land. Most of the time it's going to be Fielded Dead if we haven't already got one in play. And then if Primeval Titan survives and gets to attack again, we can then get Fielded Dead online immediately, oftentimes getting 4 tokens into play because of the double Fielded Dead trigger. And then as long as we have at least one other creature in play, whether that's a Colony Garden or an Arboreal Grazer or Kami, we then have a mana available and creatures available to transform Westvale Abbey at instant speed during the opponent's turn. And this is really huge, first of all, because it really protects the deck against flyers. So flyers are pretty good against Fielded Dead decks in general, because you're good at clogging up the ground with your Fielded Dead tokens to stop ground creatures getting in, but flyers from decks like Arclight Phoenix, Tempo decks, or, you know, stuff like Atraxa from Natural Order decks can be difficult to defend against. So the ability to transform this at instant speed after we attack with the Primeval Titan is a really good way of defending against stuff like Atraxa or Arclight Phoenix. Additionally, it's also very good at ensuring that we don't get burnt out by burn spells against a deck like Burn or Domain Zoo, where they have 4 Lightning Bolts, 4 Tribal Flames. Obviously, we do have some incidental life gain in the main deck. We've got Titan of Industry, but we do need Natural Order to get that. And off Primeval Titan, we do have Radiant Fountain, but obviously 2 life isn't a huge amount. So the ability for us to transform Westvale Abbey pretty early on in the game, attack and gain 9 life back, just completely puts those games out of reach for those sorts of decks that have a lot of burn spells in. And then additionally, just in general, having an alternate threat that we can fetch off Primeval Titan is absolutely huge, especially if the Titan ends up getting killed by something like an Unholy Heat or a Leyline Binding. Being able to get Westvale Abbey and a Fielded Dead, start getting tokens into play, and then just being able to transform our tokens into a huge threat that barely any decks can deal with this, right? Unless the opponent's running Swords to Plowshares or Leyline Binding, which not too many decks are right now. This is just a really good threat to have access to. So overall, I think the opportunity cost to run this as a one-of provides so much benefits in so many matchups. So really, really happy with this change, and I kind of wish I'd found this card in earlier builds, because it definitely feels like a great addition to the deck. Then the only other changes that I made to the deck are in this sideboard, and there are quite a few that I want to talk about here. So starting off here with 4 copies of Weathered Runestone. So as you can see, I've cut the 2 Rest in Peace and 2 Deafening Silence, which were my main sideboard cards against combo decks like Underworld Breach, and I've swapped it in for Weathered Runestone specifically for the Yawgmoth matchup. So I think Yawgmoth Natural Order was such a tough matchup with my old build of the deck, because Titan is typically weakest against combo decks because we don't have that much interaction. Well, we have barely any early interaction, and we take a while to close the game out, which gives combo decks a lot of time to assemble their combos. And Yawgmoth is kind of a nightmare matchup because they're a double combo deck, right? They've got the Yawgmoth combo, and they've also got Natural Order into Craterhoof as well. So that matchup felt almost unwinnable in a lot of situations, but Weathered Runestone really flips that matchup on its head post-sideboard, because not only does it stop the Yawgmoth combo itself, because it stops Young Wolf coming back from the graveyard, it also shuts off Chord of Calling, which is really huge, because that's a main way that they can assemble their combo, finding Yawgmoth, finding Hapatra when they already have the Yawgmoth, which is obviously very good against our board of Fielder Dead tokens, and it also shuts off Natural Order as well. So this card is a nightmare for Yawgmoth to deal with, especially because their main out to cards like this is stuff like Haywire Might, that they need to tutor off Chord of Calling, which obviously Weathered Runestone shuts down. So Runestone really flips Yawgmoth from like a 30-70 matchup to a favourable matchup post-sideboard, which is really huge. Now, the obvious downside of running Runestone here is we are a Natural Order deck ourselves, and Runestone does shut off Natural Order. So the matchups where I bring in the Runestone, I do board out the Natural Order, which is a hit to consistency. Natural Order is obviously one of the most powerful cards in the deck, but the matchups where you're bringing in the Runestone, like against Yawgmoth, like against Breach, Runestone hurts the opponent much more than it hurts theirs, and more importantly, it shuts off the parts of their deck that we're most scared of. So even though losing Order is definitely a hit to consistency, once we have a Runestone in play, it buys us enough time to just manually hardcast the Titan anyway. So I'm really happy with this change. Now, you might be wondering why I'm running Runestone over Grafdigger's Cage, which essentially does the same thing for 1 mana cheaper, and the simple answer to that is because of Molten Collapse. So against Breach, since we cut Rest in Peace and Silence, Weathered Runestone is our main cards to shut them off the combo, and that deck typically runs 2 to 3 copies of Molten Collapse, which is a very easy way for them to answer Grafdigger's Cage. And if they just crack a fetch land, trigger Descend, and then use Molten Collapse to kill like a Titan and a Grafdigger's Cage, that's such a big blowout for you. So Runestone just being 2 mana means that we get to completely avoid that. So that's the main reason for that. Overall, I was very happy with this change. I did face Yawgmoth in the Swiss, and there were a number of Yawgmoth decks in this tournament, so I'm really happy with this change because it definitely turns what felt like a very unwinnable matchup into a favoured one post-sideboard. So very happy with this change. Another change I've made is I've moved up to the full 4 copies of Get Lost in this sideboard, and the main reason for this was that I'd just seen a recent uptick in the amount of decks that are running Ashiok Dream Render, and Ashiok is very good against our deck because it shuts off the searching from Sylvan Scrying, Fierce Empath, Natural Order, and Primeval Titan, which is obviously a huge part of our deck. So having access to Get Lost as a clean answer to not only Ashiok, but basically just every hate card that anyone brings in against us. It hits every creature like Strict Proctor, Elish Norn, Meddling Mage, and also hits enchantments as well, which is obviously very big against cards like Virulent Plague and Blood Moon. So I really like getting the 4 copies of Get Lost because in the matchups where the opponent is bringing in hate cards like that against you, you always want to find the first copy, and drawing it in multiples is pretty good because if the opponent has multiple pieces of hate, you obviously will have multiple answers, and just overall it's a very flexible piece of interaction. So even if the opponent doesn't have a specific hate piece, you can just use this to take out a random creature to help you get through for lethal as well. So very happy moving up to the 4 copies of Get Lost, and while there is an increase in cards like Ashiok, I definitely think you want the full 4 copies here. Another change I've made is I've cut the Thruns in the sideboard for Veil of Summer, and this is mainly a consideration to the recent uptick of decks that I've seen that are Simic counterspell decks. So I think while the only counterspell decks that I'd seen in the format were largely stuff like blue-black and blue-white control, I typically prefer Thrun as just like an alternate threat because those decks really struggle to deal with Thrun once it's on the battlefield. Very few of the control decks are running sweepers right now, so Thrun was just a really effective alternate win condition. But recently I have seen an uptick of Oko and Uro decks that are running counter spells, and Thrun just trades so favourably into those sorts of decks because Oko can just elk the Thrun, which is a really bad exchange for you, and obviously if the opponent can escape or stifle Uro, you just can't attack past it with Thrun. So because of that, I swapped them out for Veil of Summer, which I think is a good swap. Now, in the Swiss tournaments, I did face a Grixis deck where I think I would have preferred to have Thrun, but overall, especially if you're playing on the ladder, while there is a decent amount of tempo decks running Oko and Uro and stuff like Memory Lapse and Counterspell, I think I prefer Veil of Summer because Titan typically wins those matchups, and being able to use Veil of Summer to force through cards like you know your Primeval Titan is very big. And then I still like the single copy of Carnage Tyrant here as a tutorable, uncounterable threat that you can search off Fierce Empath, and then unlike Thrun, Carnage Tyrant can't be elked by Oko either, so that's a really big advantage in that one. So I am pretty happy with this swap, I think, especially while Oko and Uro decks is still about. Not sure you need the full 4 copies of Veil of Summer, but I like having 5 threats against counterspell decks because I typically like to cut the Natural Order because Natural Order trades pretty poorly into counterspells, and then most of those decks don't typically run stuff that Stormkeld Vanguard is good against as well, so I typically want 5 cards to bring in against control. So I do like this setup, and I do think while Oko Uro counterspell decks are around, Veil of Summer is better than Thrun. And then the final change I made is swapping out Tranquil Thrillback for Haywire Might. And the main reason for this is because Tranquil Thrillback as an answer to Blood Moon, which is the main reason I was bringing it in, is a little bit awkward because you do need to already have 2 basics in play to answer it. Whereas Haywire Might, I basically just wanted to swap to an answer to Blood Moon that only required 1 basic as opposed to 2. And so I liked Haywire Might here because, you know, it's a card that also gains us a little bit of life, so kind of substitutes for Tranquil Thrillback as well. But it's also a card that we can find off once upon a time, so we can find it a little bit more consistently. Now, I'm not sure Haywire Might was the best choice in this slot because you kind of have to preemptively play it a lot of the time. You know, the advantage of Haywire Might is that because you can do it at instant speed, you don't even necessarily need a basic to use this, right? If the opponent casts Blood Moon while you have a Haywire Might in play and an untapped green land, you can just preemptively tap the green and then sacrifice it once the Blood Moon is in play. But the issue with that is that the opponent can obviously kill the Haywire Might before you use it. So I think going forwards, if I was going to run a dedicated slot here for anti-Blood Moon cards, I would probably just run 2 more Boseiju instead, because Boseiju essentially does the same thing. Obviously, it does give the opponent a land, which... Oh, hold on, I can't spell, whoops. Obviously, giving the opponent a land is a pretty big downside, but I feel that the big advantage with Boseiju is it's instant speed, which I think is very important. You know, I was considering going for extra 2 copies of Stormcloud Vanguard, but as I mentioned, the big upside of Haywire Might here is that... you know, you can do it without any basics if you're holding up green mana. And so I do think whatever you have in this slot to deal with Blood Moon does want to be at instant speed, so you don't even necessarily need a basic to answer the Blood Moon. And the other big advantage of Boseiju over another card like Wilt, for example, is that you can also find it off once upon a time, so it does increase your ability to find it. Now, one other thing that I have been considering going forwards is potentially just relying on Get Lost as an answer to Blood Moon, just to make room in the sideboard for a couple more cards, because obviously, we're already running full Get Lost, which does answer Blood Moon, and I do envisage a lot of the Blood Moon decks running both Blood Moon and Ashiok going forwards, in which case we'd probably want to be bringing in Get Lost in those matchups anyway. That we could try and rely on Get Lost as our main answer to Blood Moon post sideboard. However, the awkward thing about that is that Get Lost incentivizes you to be fetching Temple Garden to have the mana to cast it over a basic, which is a bit awkward, and then you might be forced into these play patterns where you constantly have to hold open 2 mana against the Blood Moon decks so that they can't resolve it. So I'm not 100% sure if this is correct, but one card that I have been thinking about trying to find room for in the sideboard is Pithing Needle, because I do think, you know, I want to cover all my bases against combo. I feel like this deck is so good against everything that isn't combo that I want to dedicate sideboard cards to be able to answer the combo decks. As I said, I think Runestone is great against both Breach and Yawgmoth, but I do want to try and find room for Pithing Needle, which is very good against both Necropotence decks and Belcher. I think Belcher is one of the scariest decks to face with this deck because it's so fast and so consistent at assembling its combos. So one thing I've been tempted to do going forwards is potentially just cut these 2 Boseijus for 2 Pithing Needles, which then, you know, gives us good answers to a lot of the combo decks, right? We've got 4 Runestone for Yawg and for Yawg and Breach, and then we could have 2 Pithing Needles to help against Necropotence and against Belcher as well. So I think I'm going to try that in the deck list. In the deck list that I'm going to be linking in the description, I will leave a link to a version that has 2 Pithing Needle over Boseiju. Again, it could be a little bit awkward relying on Get Lost over Boseiju because then we have to fetch Temple Garden over a basic. So it could just be correct to run Boseijus and just kind of be weak to Belcher as your main kind of like auto-lose matchup. But those are my thoughts over the changes. I think overall I'm very happy with this version of the deck. I think Westfell Abbey is a great change, and I think the sideboard changes that I've just gone through are very good as well. So next up we got the gameplay. Now, as I said, I've got all 7 rounds recorded, plus the top 8 matches as well. Now, I didn't record commentary as I was playing the games because I did want to focus at the time, and it also went on quite late for me in Europe, so I didn't want to keep my housemates up either. So what I'm going to do is just record some commentary over the games after the fact, kind of talking you through them, my thought processes, and adding relevant context to the matchups as well, because it was open deck list, so I did know, you know, the exact list 75 that my opponent was playing. Anyway, I overall hope you enjoyed the video. If you like this sort of thing and you want me to upload videos like this in future, if I do play it in any third-party tournaments, definitely let me know. And I hope you enjoyed the gameplay. Big up. Okay, so round 1 here, and we're paired into Natural Order Yawgmoth. So I was very, very happy that I'd made the recent changes to this deck, because I think this matchup is so much worse if we're not running Westfell Abbey and 4 Weathered Runestone in the sideboard. This matchup is so difficult to win outside of that. And I did see, you know, I looked at the deck list and I saw at least 4 or 5 other players on Yawg as well. So very happy that I made the changes. Having said that, the matchup is still quite difficult even with those changes, but we've given ourselves a much better chance with this. So this hand on the play, obviously, you know, not super fast fast, but this is a turn 4 Titan, right? We Grazer on 1, and we have the Castle Gambrig here. So I think this is a keep, right? You know, there's no real use in going any lower. I think game 1 is very difficult for us to win. Post-sideboard is where the real improvements go because of the Weathered Runestone. So game 1, our goal is to just race, and I don't think we can afford to mulligan a turn 4 Titan here. We also have a lot of very good draws, right? If we draw something like a Natural Order off the top or a Sunken Citadel, we can potentially go for a turn 3 Titan. So even though we do have quite a lot of lands here, I think this is definitely a keep. Just got to hope the opponent doesn't have a crazy fast start. And then obviously winning the die roll is huge in this matchup game 1 as well. You know, being able to steal game 1 against the Yorg deck is huge, because then you've got 2 opportunities post-sideboard to find the Weathered Runestone, which is just the key in this matchup from my experience. So unfortunately we don't draw a Citadel or a Natural Order, so we don't have the turn 3 Titan quite yet. Still have another draw step to find the Natural Order potentially, but, you know, still in a reasonable spot. Obviously, Deathrite Shaman does allow the opponent to have some acceleration, which is a little bit scary. And the opponent does have Halfling as well, so they do have a lot of mana going into next turn. Obviously, off the Deathrite Shaman, they could also represent Bowmasters, which is a way they could take out the 0/1 token, but we already have the Grazer in play, so that's only really relevant against exactly Natural Order, and we already have the Grazer in play to sack to Natural Order, so not a huge deal. So the opponent does use the Deathrite Shaman during their main phase here. Can't quite remember what they play here. Okay, yeah, Demonic Tutor. So my thoughts when I see this are probably that they're going to get Natural Order here. I mean, if they've already got a good hand with Yawgmoth, they could obviously fetch Yorg, but, you know, with 2 creatures in play, they could very easily go for Natural Order into Atraxa, which is very scary. Now, unfortunately, we do keep drawing lands. Didn't find anything to play before turn 5, so not had much help off the top, but, you know, we've still got Primeval Titan next turn, and I think this could be a situation, or, you know, in the time I was thinking this is a situation where Westvale Abbey could be very relevant, particularly if they do go for Natural Order this turn, which is kind of what I predicted they would get off the Demonic Tutor, because that is their most high impact play. And lo and behold, they do have the Natural Order, so, you know, I think it would be a waste for them to get Crater Hoof on this board state, so I expect them to get the Atraxa here, which they do. And in this spot, I'm obviously very happy to have Westvale Abbey in the deck, because without Westvale Abbey, we don't have Natural Order to be able to fetch Titan of Industry as a blocker, but we can fetch Westvale Abbey off Primeval Titan, which is very big here, because otherwise we probably just lose to the Atraxa damage, quite honestly. There's no way that we can really race on the ground with Field of Dead tokens. They've obviously got another Atraxa and a Yawgmoth, so in this spot, I think we have absolutely no chance without Westvale Abbey. So, you know, as I mentioned, very, very happy with the changes that I made to the deck going into this round. You know, specifically, I think the changes really do improve the Yawgmoth matchup. So definitely going to go for Primeval Titan here, and then definitely going to get the Westvale Abbey, as I said. And then I can't quite remember what I get for the other land here. I think there's a few different considerations. You could maybe go for Blast Zone, you could maybe go for Radiant Fountain, you could maybe go for a fetch land as well if you're worried about not having enough tokens in play for the Westvale Abbey. Looking back on it now, I think Blast Zone is reasonable if you want to take out the Deathrite Shaman. I don't think Bajuka Bog does much. I think I prefer Radiant Fountain, though, just to buffer our life total a little bit, because we are going to be taking at least 1 hit from the Atraxa, and we don't want to risk getting drained out by Yawgmoth either. Okay, yeah, so it looks like I do go for the Radiant Fountain, which, looking back at this game, I do agree with. I do think it's just worth buffering your life total here wherever possible. Now, it doesn't make a difference in terms of the clock with the Atraxa, really, because obviously with 7 power, it's a 3-turn clock regardless whether I'm at 18 or 20. But, you know, hopefully I will be able to transform this Westvale Abbey, which will stop the Atraxa from attacking. And then my next concern is either Crater Hoof or being drained out by Yawgmoth here. So I think Radiant Fountain makes a lot of sense here. If I hadn't got the Colony Garden already, that's also another potential consideration there. But I think I like getting the Radiant Fountain. So obviously, the opponent has 2 main choices here from what we know, whether they go for the Yawgmoth or for the Natural Order here. Now, I think they go for the Natural Order into Crater Hoof, which I was actually pretty relieved to see. Now, obviously, that does apply a ton of pressure, and the opponent doesn't necessarily know that we're going to be able to transform the Westvale Abbey here, but what I was worried about from the opponent in this spot is that they would take this turn committing more creatures to the board like Yawgmoth, and then just have a completely lethal Crater Hoof next turn that we can't do anything about. Them going for Crater Hoof this turn does apply a ton of pressure, and I guess the opponent's thinking, okay, we're forced to block here. They can probably then just go for lethal off Atraxa again the following turn, but we're not really worrying about lethal this turn, right? They're getting in for 20 damage, so I'm going to soak up a decent amount of that damage, but I really want to keep this Primeval Titan alive here to get in, get more Field of Dead tokens in play, and then we can transform the Westvale Abbey next turn, which is going to be really big at just stopping Atraxa getting in. So I decided to block with the Grazer and the 2 tokens here, which I think I agree with. We absolutely want to keep Primeval Titan alive to get the tokens into play, not only to defend on the ground, but also to be able to transform the Westvale Abbey. And then keeping the 0-1 alive also makes a lot of sense as well, I think, because, the difference between taking 1 damage and having an extra body on the battlefield makes a lot of sense. Again, I don't want to go too low in case they have, Yawgmoth into Blood Artist, for example, and they could potentially start draining us out. So here, I think natural order off the top is interesting. I think what I'm doing at this point is trying to calculate if we have lethal ourselves with Crater Hoof, but obviously the opponent has Atraxa, which is a 7 life swing back in their favour. So, taking my time here to just calculate whether I could potentially go Forest, get a token, natural order into Crater Hoof, whether that would be enough. Definitely isn't because of the Atraxa. So I think the optimal play here is to just... I think I'm also calculating whether I can get somehow enough tokens into play to preemptively flip the Westvale Abbey, but I think the correct play here would be to just attack with the Primeval Titan, get 2 more Field of the Deads in play another land, and then just hold up the Westvale Abbey activation. Transform at instant speed, potentially bait them into attacking. So get 2 Field of Deads in play, get a bunch of tokens. We don't unfortunately have enough mana to go for Natural Order and Westvale Abbey, unless I'm mistaken, right? We have... Yeah, we're 2 mana short of doing that. So we attack him with the Titan. The other nice thing here is that if they do block the Titan with the Atraxa here, we can sacrifice it at instant speed with the Westvale Abbey. So that does get rid of the surprise factor of the Westvale Abbey here. And I end up... Okay, yeah, I end up sacrificing the zombie tokens, keeping the plant token around so that we have a target to sacrifice to Natural Order next turn. And I do like this play, I think while Westvale Abbey is unknown, you can potentially bait the opponent into attacking with something like Atraxa, but doing this just makes much more sense, because if the opponent plays optimally, they're not going to attack with the Atraxa anyway. And doing this also not only leaves us with an extra body on the battlefield, because we're sacrificing the Titan that would be dying anyway, but we also deny the opponent that 7 life gain, which could be very relevant, particularly because we can just go Natural Order into Crater Hoof this turn as well. So I feel pretty happy about this situation. I do wonder if the opponent could have potentially won if they'd taken last turn off to commit more creatures to the battlefield, so that Crater Hoof would have been lethal this turn. Again, we don't know their hand. There's a reasonable chance that Yawgmoth is their only creature, in which case taking an extra turn just to put 1 more creature into play might not actually achieve lethal, especially if we have the mana up to use Ormondal again. So not 100% sure, but I'm pretty confident about this slot in the game, and being able to steal game 1 against Yawgmoth when we have those 4 Weathered Runestones in this sideboard is absolutely huge. So I'm really happy with the position here. Again, I am a little bit worried about stabilizing at 7 against Yawg, because, they could potentially have a crazy turn where they go Yawg into Blood Artist and just sacrifice their whole board, especially with a Young Wolf in play. They can get a ton of activations off that. And so, not 100% sure we've got this one locked up, but with Natural Order into Crater Hoof next turn, if they just spend their turn just casting Yawg, we basically just guaranteed winning here. So Westvale Abbey basically just won us this game, right? If we didn't have access to Ormondal, we would be dead on board to that 7 attack in the air. I mean, we could have not blocked with the Arboreal Grazer and held that back to block Atraxa with, but, I think we would probably be losing this game without Westvale Abbey. So this just, immediately shows the power of Westvale Abbey. First of all, it's stabilizing against flyers. So I'm very happy with this change to the deck. So now we can go Fierce Empath. We could obviously tutor the Crater Hoof now. That was a pretty nice top deck, but we're just going to tutor the Titan and then Natural Order the Fierce Empath into the Crater Hoof just for maximum damage here. So yeah, as I said, stealing game 1 against this Yawgmoth deck is so big, because it is a very difficult matchup to win typically. Now, having said that, I do think Westvale Abbey does improve the game 1, specifically for the reasons that you've seen here, right? Atraxa is a very good way that they can just apply a lot of pressure in the early game, especially if they can get it off on turn 3, which I believe they did in this game. Can't quite remember, but, this is a really good way also of just gaining us a bunch of life, because the other thing about the Yawg deck is they do take a little while to assemble the infinite combo. A lot of the times they can just set up Yawg for a ton of value, which is good at, dealing us damage if they do have like a Blood Artist when they don't have the double Young Wolf set up. So gaining a bunch of life does just help us to stabilize as well. So yeah, very happy to steal game 1. And now post sideboard, we're definitely going to get these Weathered Runestones in the deck as well. And then we're going to cut the natural orders. Now, obviously it does suck a little bit to have to cut the natural orders. And I believe I end up cutting the Stormcloud Vanguard and keeping in one natural order here, because obviously there's a trade-off. You know, you're not always going to find the Weathered Runestone. So having a single copy of natural order doesn't seem too high risk here, particularly when Stormcloud Vanguard doesn't do anything. My opponent wasn't running Agatha's Soul Cauldron, so there wasn't really a target we could hit. So I was considering bringing in the Get Lost as a single card. But as I mentioned, you know, natural order is such a high impact card. And my thought process here was, if we can get Weathered Runestone in play, we're good anyway, right? Unless they happen to naturally draw their one of Haywire Might. I believe that was their only answer to Weathered Runestone, was the single copy of Haywire Might. And if we can get Runestone in play and they don't naturally draw it, they can't Chord of Calling for the Runestone, because Runestone shuts it off. So my logic was, if I draw the Runestone, I'm good. And so even if I draw natural order, it's not too much of a big deal. But if I don't draw the Runestone, then drawing that single copy of natural order gives me the ability to race a bit faster, right? If I already have a Titan in play, I can use it to fetch Crater Hoof like we did last game. If I don't have a Titan, we can use it to get an early Titan down, which is a good way to get Westvale Abbey online like we saw again there. But post sideboard, you know, I'm really hoping for Runestone to put in work here. So going into game 2, obviously being on the draw is going to make things more difficult, but post-sideboard things are going to improve a lot more. And I am going to mulligan aggressively to either a very fast start or a Weathered Runestone here. Because I'm not 100% sure, you know, I'll have to ask the Yawgmoth players whether Yawgmoth would bring in Thoughtseize against me as a way to answer the Weathered Runestone. Because it is open decklist, right? The opponent does know exactly what I'm running, but, you know, so that's maybe a consideration to not mulligan too much. Because obviously mulliganing into Thoughtseize is rough, and also mulliganing hard to Weathered Runestone is rough if the opponent can just Thoughtseize it away. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. That's probably why it was in my mind, because I do have a vague recollection of them using Thoughtseize here, but drew the double Runestone here, so got pretty lucky against the Thoughtseize here, having the 2 Runestones. I'm pretty sure if I only had a single Runestone, they would definitely be taking the Runestone here. Although having said that, if I did only have a single Runestone here, we would have natural order as, you know, it would make our natural order live. So obviously drawing a Kami off the top when they just took a Grazer is a pretty nice top deck here. It does give us some acceleration. But I end up choosing not to play the Kami on turn 1 just because I think I want to get Runestone into play as early as possible, right? Just to shut off Chord of Calling. Although having said that, we do draw another land now, so there is potentially an argument to maybe going Kami on turn 2, but I want to be efficient with my mana and just get Runestone into play as as early as possible, because they already have Chord of Calling live here, right? I just want to shut off their ability to be able to tutor the Haywire Might. So in this spot, we've got a few options. We could potentially get the second Runestone in play, but I'm really not too worried about them killing it, because as I said, I believe from their deck list we could see that their only answer to it was Haywire Might, which they'd have to naturally draw. I'm pretty sure they would have played Haywire Might already if they had it. So here we just go for Sylvan Shrine, grab a Castle Garenbrig, which is very big now we've drawn the Primeval Titan. Now we should be able to cast Titan next turn, assuming we draw another land. So now we can play Castle Garenbrig, and you could play Kami into Radiant Fountain, but what I choose to do here is just hold on to the Kami and channel it if we don't draw another land off the top, because obviously accelerating here into Titan a turn earlier is pretty big, but I feel like Runestone is just locking the game down anyway, so it doesn't really matter if we wait. And I am very glad I waited, because if we had kept missing land drops, we would just be doing nothing for the next few turns. So obviously not playing that Kami last turn does delay our potential ability to get Titan into play the following turn, but this way guarantees that we're going to be able to get Titan into play here regardless of whether we draw lands or not. So obviously drawing the Kami off the top does mean that we accelerate a little bit faster, which is obviously very big, but I quite like that play because I don't really feel like there's a sense of urgency here to get Titan into play immediately, right? If they already had a really big creature in play, then I think we probably do have to just go Kami, accelerate, hope to rip a land off the top. But I'm very glad that I waited, because as we can see here, I missed land drops off the top for the next 2 turns. So I quite like that play. It just plays things a little bit safer when we're not under immediate pressure. So here we want to get 2 lands that aren't Field of the Dead, obviously, to try and get Field of the Dead online as early as possible. Definitely go for the Westvale Abbey again, because we saw how good it was last game, and it's just an alternate threat that can just start closing the game out, even if the opponent has blockers on the ground, because Yawgmoth is good at clogging up the ground themselves, which means that Field of the Dead tokens can take a few turns to get through. And then not sure what the best other card here is. We could get a fetch land potentially to get 2 triggers. Could also get a Blast Zone to be able to take out, you know, their other 1-drops that they play. And then there's also consideration here to holding onto the forest while we don't have a a Fill the Dead online yet, but I feel with a Cameo of Bamboo Groves in hand that we can use to channel, it's probably correct to just run the Forest out here just so we have access to extra mana going into next turn, because then we can potentially, you know, play Weathered Runestone and hold open mana to activate Westvale Abbey in the same turn. And so I feel pretty confident about this spot. You know, I feel like if they had Haywire Might draw naturally, they would have cast it already. So I'm not too worried about them going Might into Natural Order, for example. And we obviously have the backup copy of Weathered Runestone in hand as well. So opponent cast the Yawgmoth, which, you know, again, I'm not too worried about because there's no way they can combo off with the Weathered Runestone in play. Because if they try and bring Young Wolf back from the graveyard, the Runestone will just shut it off. So, going to cast the second Runestone here. Another Titan off the top is also very good here, obviously. So, I think what I'm going to do here is attack with the Titan first. We could potentially use the Westvale Abbey activation, but I feel like Titan is just going to bury them under, you know, a ton of zombies so quickly that it's worth just going for the Titan here. So, how many different lands we got in play? We got 6 different land types in play. So, we're going to get Fill the Dead and another land here. I don't think it really matters too much. We could go for Colony Garden to get another blocker in play. We could go Gate to Manaborn if we want to be able to seek another card. We could also go for another fetch land, which is what it looks like I go for here. Yeah, get a fetch land so we can trigger it again next turn, which, you know, gives us more ways, or sorry, more creatures that we're not missing out on attacking with to be able to trigger Westvale Abbey, for example. So opponent lets it through, and now we have enough mana to go for the second Weathered Runestone and another Primeval Titan here, which should just completely lock the game up, right? If they are sandbagging a Haywire Might, we have redundancy for that second copy. We get another Titan into play here, which gets a ton more extra zombies in play, and then next turn, you know, we can crack the fetch, transform the Westvale Abbey, attack again, and then I think this game is pretty much wrapped up from the looks of things. So, you know, this should hopefully show the power of Westvale Abbey and Weathered Runestone as well. Now, Weathered Runestone is a tricky one to show the power of because it's not a card where you really get to see its full impact, because we don't get to see what the opponent has in their hand. You know, I think there's a very good chance they have Chord of Calling, Natural Order in their hand, because they did have quite a slow start, right? I think there's a reasonable chance that they had early creatures and Natural Order, and because we got that Weathered Runestone in play on turn 2, those cards are just completely dead for the opponents. But, you know, Runestone just really shuts off the most powerful parts of the Yawgmoth deck, so I'm very happy with this change. Obviously, there is some downsides in the fact that it makes it worse against Breach. You know, the nice thing about having Rest in Peace against Breach is you still get to keep Natural Order in, which makes your proactive game plan a little better. And it is a little bit more awkward against a deck like Phoenix as well, where I don't think Weathered Runestone is that great because it doesn't shut off Delirium, it doesn't shut off Treasure Cruise. And so that matchup, not having access to Rest in Peace or Deafening Silence, is a little bit more awkward. But Phoenix isn't really a common deck. I still think Phoenix is held back from the fact that that deck has a real issue where if you run a lot of interaction to kill Bowmasters, you can't afford to run Spell Pierce, so then you're bad against fast combo decks. And then if you run Spell Pierce, you have fewer pieces of creature removal for Bowmasters. So I think Phoenix is a strong deck, but not one that I see very commonly because it has this kind of dual weakness to both Bowmasters and combo, and it's really hard to find a build that is good against both, if that makes sense. So opponent here is just trying to draw out of it and find that out, but I think at this point the game's pretty much over, right? They don't have any way to assemble the combo because of Runestone, they can't Chord of Calling, they can't Natural Order, so this one's pretty much locked up. So opponent tries to sack the Young Wolf, obviously doesn't come back from the graveyard because of Weathered Runestone. So yeah, getting to 2-0 Yawgmoth round 1 with the cards that I swapped specifically for this matchup felt really good. Okay, they did have the Besaju, I forgot about that. So they did have answer for one of the Runestones. So drawing the, you know, having redundancy, having the full 4 copies meant that we were able to play through Thoughtseize and Besaju, which is pretty big. Okay, so round 2 here, and we're basically in a mirror match. I believe there is a few different cards in Philippa's list. I think they're running Cityscape Leveler in the main deck, for example, but very similar list, and we win the die roll, which is huge. I think this matchup is very die roll dependent, especially when both players have Craterhoof Behemoth. So this hand, I think we have to keep, right? We don't have any untapped mana for turn 1, but we have Citadel and Grazer and Natural Order as well. So plus we got Craterhoof in hand, which is very big. You know, typically once you get Titan into play, you can prioritize getting enough lands to be able to just go for Craterhoof the following turn. And this matchup is all about getting your Fill the Dead online and then getting Craterhoof in play first, right? If you can get Fill the Dead online with a few tokens and get your Craterhoof, that's the way that you win the mirror match here. So definitely lead on the Once Upon a Time here. Try and find a forest, which we do. And I think, you know, the basic is better here. We don't need the Temple Garden for any reason. The only reason you consider the Temple Garden there is in case you want to potentially channel Kami on future turns. You know, if we had a Kami of Bamboo Graves in hand, I think there's a good argument to going for Temple Garden instead there, because The Kami generates forests, which obviously, you don't want 2 lands of the same name if you can avoid it. So ship it back, and Philippa also has a grazer. By the way, I believe this match was also a feature match, so if you're interested in seeing the matchup from Philippa's side, I'll leave a link to the Twitch VOD in the description if you want to check it out. So we use Once Upon a Time here to find a land. We want to do it preemptively in case it is a tap land like the Sunken Citadel. So obviously having 2 lands of the same name is pretty awkward here because it delays us getting fielded online. But since we're going to be going for the turn 3 natural order here, it doesn't really make too much of a difference because it won't really... it will limit the amount of tokens we can create, but it won't delay our ability to get fielded online that much. So now we can go for natural order. Getting the first person to get Primeval Titan into play is pretty huge here. Obviously, there's a reasonable chance that Philippa also has a natural order as well. Thankfully, they don't have Sunken Citadel or Castle Garenbrig here, though, which means we don't have to worry about them just hard casting Titans. So definitely going to be getting fielded dead here. And then I think I get Westfell Abbey as well, because Abbey is also good in the mirror match here. If the opponent does pull ahead in terms of the zombie tokens, then Westfell Abbey can potentially be a way to flip the matchup on its head slightly here. So my hope here is that they don't have the natural order, because if they don't, then we start to pull ahead very quickly here, right? If they're reliant on a Castle Garenbrig, then they have to wait until turn 4 to get Titan online, which would be a pretty big game for us. But even if they do have natural order here, I still feel we're in a pretty good spot. The fact they have Stomping Ground and Handmill Battlements on the battlefield also means that we don't have to worry about them giving any follow-up Titan's haste immediately, because they just don't have enough mana to do both. So they do have the natural order, unfortunately. They do get the Primeval Titan. Thankfully, they don't get their fielded dead online straight away. And so this turn, we can go Radiant Fountain, attack with the Titan, get more fielded dead tokens in play, and then cast Titan of Industry. And then I'm pretty happy about this spot. I don't think there's any real way we can lose this, because even if Philippa has a Crater Hoof this turn, it's not going to be enough for lethal, because they just don't have enough attackers. So I feel like there's basically no way that we can lose this matchup at this point, as long as we just go for Crater Hoof next turn, right? We could also potentially... the alternative to Titan of Industry is Generous Scent, but I feel like we just want to get more power into play. And we definitely don't want to be using the Westfell Abbey here because... we want as many creatures in play as possible for the Crater Hoof to be lethal here. So I think getting Colony Garden and Field of Dead is absolutely correct here. Again, we just want as many bodies in play as possible. And this is another reason why Titan of Industry is just much better than Generous Scent, because not only do we get a 7/7 trample, but we also get a 4/4 token as well. So, and then I don't think there's any point in putting the shield counter on, right? Might as well just gain the 5 life, which can potentially be relevant. But yeah, I think we should just have this game locked up. Being on the play here makes all the difference, right? If we were on the draw, then Philip is attacking with their Primeval Titan before ours, potentially forcing us to block, and then they could potentially go for Crater Hoof before us. So play draw is very important in these sorts of matchups, as is Crater Hoof, as we'll see. So they get the Field of Dead online here, and then they could potentially go for Titan plus the haste here, because they do have the Castle Garenbrig. I believe, right? They have enough mana to do both, but they would just be suiciding the Primeval Titan into Titan of Industry. And since we have the Crater Hoof in hand, we're just winning here regardless. Yeah, so they do have enough mana to go Titan plus haste. And they do have the follow-up Titan as well. So, I'll have to watch the VOD back. I can't remember if they did have a Crater Hoof. I think that's the key difference maker. Even if they had 2 Titans with the Hammer Battlements, that's still probably not good enough to beat Titan plus Crater Hoof, just because it produces so much extra power once you've gone wide, and you can afford to let the Titan hit you a couple of times. So they choose not to give the Titan haste, probably because it would just die attacking into the Titan of Industry. From their point of view, from their side of the board, I still think I would probably attack with the Titan, just because getting... Although they do already have the 3 Fielded Deads in play, so not 100% sure on that. So we draw a fetch land, which gives us even more tokens in play here, and then we can just crack the fetch... get another 2 zombies in play, and then just go for Crater Hoof, and this is way over lethal. Even with a Titan and 8 tokens in play, this is going to buff our whole board by 11/11 and give everything... 12/12, obviously. Get in for a huge amount of damage and manage to get game 1. I think play draw is pretty important, but even on the draw, I think the player who has Titan into Crater Hoof is going to pull ahead more often than not. So then post-sideboard, there's not really too much that we've got to bring in here. I think Stormcurled Vanguard basically does nothing in the matchup, really, other than just being a fairly big creature. So I think I cut the Stormcurled Vanguard for a Get Lost here. In Philippa's list, they are running the 4th copy of Field of the Dead, which does give them an advantage post-sideboard. Now, having said that, I think Crater Hoof is just by far and away the most important card in this matchup, which does break the symmetry regardless of how many Field of Deads the other player has. But if both players don't have the Crater Hoof, the fourth copy of Field of Dead definitely does give you an edge in the mirror match. So I like swapping out the Stormcloud Vanguard for Get Lost, and then I think that's basically it. I think I'm just checking Philippa's deck list here, and I'm probably just going to edit out the rest of sideboarding if it takes a while, because I don't want the video to drag on for too long. So post sideboard here, I think the key is to just make sure you have a fast start, right? Especially on the draw, I think you do need to have a fast Titan, or, the ideal setup would be Titan into Crater Hoof somehow. So if you've got, acceleration into Primeval Titan into Natural Order, or acceleration into Primeval Titan into Crater Hoof, that's exactly what you're looking for. Especially on the draw, you kind of need that Crater Hoof to break the play-draw dynamic. So this hand, I can't remember if I keep this or not. I think this one's probably too slow, right? We don't have a Titan. We do have acceleration. Wow, I end up keeping it. Okay, interesting. I'm not sure I agree with that looking back on it here. I mean, we do have 2 Once Upon a Times to hopefully find a Titan or an Empath, and we do have the Terminal Acceleration, but we don't have Natural Order, and we don't have a Castle Garenbrig, so... Okay, we do find another cameo off the top, and we do find a Fierce Empath as well, but looking back on it, I think I'm probably supposed to mulligan this. Just because I don't think it's fast enough. We're missing too many pieces. I mean, having said that, I can see why I kept this, because we do have, I think it's important to have the early acceleration, and we do have double Once Upon a Time, which is very likely to find us either Empath or Titan, and we do find the Empath. But the awkward thing here is that we don't have the Castle Garenbrig either. So, at best here we've got like a turn 5 Titan. So I think this is probably a mulligan looking back on it. I think I did misplay here. I think this hand was just missing too many pieces. If this Field of Dead was a Castle Garenbrig, then I absolutely think this is a viable keep. But as things stand, I think this hand is just too slow and missing too many pieces. So yeah, I definitely think I made a mistake this game, not mulliganing a bit more aggressively. So the opponent already has Primeval Titan in hand. Thankfully they don't have Castle Garenbrig, but they could obviously have the Natural Order for this turn, and then I think we're just too far behind at that point. Obviously if we draw a Garenbrig off the top, then that's pretty nice, because then we can go for Titan next turn, and we obviously have the Once Upon a Time to try and find that. Yeah, they do have the Natural Order, so yeah, I think my big mistake this game was just not mulliganing. I don't know why I kept this hand. It was just too slow. You especially on the draw, I think you need to mulligan a little bit more aggressively. But yeah, like I said, if I had Sunken Citadel plus Castle Garenbrig, I think this would be definitely a good keep, because then we have 2 Once Upon a Times to try and find either Empath or the Titan itself. But as things stand, the opponent already has a Titan in play. We do find a Titan and we have an Empath, so from this point I guess it doesn't really matter. I think we have to take one of the Titan or the Crater Hoof here, and then use Empath to try and find the other one. I think, looking back on it, I would take the Crater Hoof here. Yeah, okay, so I do take the Crater Hoof, and then we can go Empath, tutoring the Titan, but, we're still not getting Titan into play until next turn. They already have a second Titan here, so yeah, I think this game was lost on the mulligan decision, honestly. I mean, we still, we have the Kami, so we can go fetch... Temple Garden fetch makes sense. Actually, thinking about it, I think I also misplayed on turn 1. I'm supposed to get the Temple Garden instead of the Snow-Covered Forest, because we boarded in the single copy of Get Lost. Because the 2 life generally doesn't matter too much in this matchup, early on anyway. And if I had drawn Get Lost, that could have obviously made a difference. So I misplayed in terms of the mulligan decision, and I also misplayed in terms of not fetching the Temple Garden on turn 1 here. But yeah, we're just way too far behind here, I think. I mean, I don't think it's worth conceding quite yet, because actually, having said that, they get another attack with Primeval Titan here. But yeah, we're pretty much just dead here. Again, had we got our own Titan into play the previous turn, then we could potentially set up for Crater Hoof before they have lethal themselves. But at this point, we're pretty much dead, and I definitely should have just mulliganed that hand. I think it's even more important when you're going second to mulligan more aggressively, because you are on the back foot already, right? Play draw is very important in this matchup, like I said a few times, and so you really want to have a way to break that symmetry, mulligan more aggressively to Titan into Crater Hoof, because that is the way you break the dynamic. So Don't think there's any changes I want to make post-sideboard. Okay, I cut Titan of Industry for a second, get lost. I do quite like that, to be honest. There's very few situations where you would ever natural order for the Titan of Industry here. So, yeah, I think I probably should have made that change even going into game 2. Because Get Lost is just more useful than Titan of Industry. In this matchup, you're either always going to go for the Titan to get your more Field of Deads available, get more tokens into play, or go for the Crater Hoof to close the game out. So yeah, I do like that change in sideboard. I didn't even think about that when I was watching it back. But yeah, to Get Lost is just much more useful in this matchup than Titan of Industry or the Stormceld Vanguard. So again, I'm just going to edit out sideboarding here to save a little bit of time in the video. Okay, so going into game 3, obviously we're going to be on the play here, which is very, very big in this matchup. And again, you know, we do need to make sure that we have a fast start here. We saw from last game that that's kind of a disaster if we don't. So this hand is just, you know, unplayable. 2-tap lands. I mean, obviously having Empath, Natural Order, and Titan is what you want to see in this matchup. You want ways to get Titan into Crater Hoof, and then we mulligan into a no-lander, which is, you know, obviously very rough. So we go down to 5, and this is a keep. Right, we have Citadel, Garen Brig, and then we're definitely going to put back Get Lost. And this is a tough decision because Titan into Natural Order is how you win this matchup. So this is just between whether we want to put back Sylvan Scrying or Once Upon a Time, I think. You really want Titan into Natural Order, which is how you win. And then Sylvan Scrying guarantees a forest. I think I like putting back the Scrying, though, because to win with this hand, you really want to Once Upon a Time into a basic, or, you know, some way for the Garen Brig to enter untapped so that we can go for the Titan on turn 4. And then I'm tempted to go for Once Upon a Time here, but I actually think I wait on it, which is an interesting choice, but I think I quite like this because Sunken Citadel is entering tapped regardless. I don't think there's too much of an advantage searching for a tap land this turn because there's nothing that we can play off it. So I actually like waiting for the turn, seeing what we draw for the next draw step, because if we draw a basic forest or some land that can make Garen Brig enter untapped, then using Once Upon a Time, we can either try and find another land or something like a Grazer. So I actually think, you know, there's obviously the heuristic that you should always cast Once Upon a Time on turn 0 or turn 1 to try and see what you can find. But in this spot, I actually think I like waiting. I do like the play I went for here. So here we go for Once Upon a Time, and unfortunately we don't find a way for Castle Garen Brig to enter untapped. So I think Grazer is the pick here, right? We can go Grazer, get double Garen Brig into play, and then all we need is an untapped land off the top, and we can go for the turn 3 Titan into Natural Order, which is how we win. So obviously we do need help off the top here, but I do like this line. If we go for Field of the Dead, then that doesn't really help at all, right? The earliest, if we don't draw an untapped land that we can get Titan into play of that would be turn 5, right? So I like this play, right? We run a Multi 5. We have Titan, we have Natural Order. All we need here is an untapped land off the top. And we are running a very high land count, so, you know, obviously on a Multi 5 you do need a little bit of help off the top, but I definitely like how I've played this one. I think waiting on Once Upon a Time was correct. And we do rip the land off the top, which is obviously exactly what we needed here. We're so happy to see that at the time. So we do get the Titan in play here, and I think this is really big because the awkward thing with our draw here is we have double Garen Brig. So even though we get Titan into play on turn 3 here, which is very, very good on a Multi 5, we're not going to get Field of Dead online until next turn at the earliest. And even then, we're not producing a ton of tokens. So if Philippa has a Titan here, because they had to wait until their 5th land, they do get Field of Dead online immediately, right? If they go untapped land into Primeval Titan here, they get Field of Dead online, which does mean that they potentially can go for Crater Hoof the following turn, right? So I think missing a land drop there would have been pretty brutal because, you know, it doesn't necessarily lose us the game, but, you know, if we have to wait an extra turn to get Field of Dead online, we could potentially just get attacked around. So as I said, they do have the Primeval Titan here, so they can get Field of Dead online. So even though we had turn 3 Titan into Natural Order, we have to wait to get Field of Dead online to attack. So there's a chance that Philippa can still race us here, right? Because they get 2 tokens off Field of Dead immediately. If they have something like a land into Crater Hoof or land into Natural Order, they can still potentially race us here. Thankfully, though, they completely empty their hand. They Grazer into another land here, so they would have to draw Natural Order or Crater Hoof off the top to be able to race us here. So we draw Sylvan Scrying, which is not bad here because then we can get an extra land type into play, which enables us to get more Field of Dead tokens this turn. And I definitely think the correct play here is to go for Westvale Abbey, because we're obviously going to hold on to this Natural Order until next turn. We want to make sure that we have enough power into play so that Natural Order into Crater Hoof is lethal here. And Westvale Abbey is really nice because it kind of incentivizes them not to attack with the Crater Hoof, right? Because we can just transform the Westvale Abbey at instant speed to block the Primeval Titan. Now, obviously, we don't want to do that. We want to keep as many creatures in play as possible, so that Crater Hoof is more than enough for lethal next turn. I definitely like going for the fetch land here as well, because that means that we get more tokens in play to guarantee that Crater Hoof is lethal here. Unfortunately, we do lose the Titan to their tokens, which does mean they have fewer creatures in play in case they do rip a Crater Hoof off the top. But the nice thing here is we're representing the Westvale Abbey activation, which might incentivize them not to attack. I still think from their point of view it's still correct to attack, and I'm just praying they don't hit a Crater Hoof or Natural Order off the top, which they don't. Very, very happy to see that. I'm not even sure if Crater Hoof would be lethal here because we have access to Westvale Abbey as a blocker. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I'd have to stop and properly calculate it here, but I'm very happy about this spot. Basically, it means that we guaranteed the win here, right? We just let the damage through. Obviously, we could transform the Westvale Abbey and eat the Primeval Titan, but as I said, we've got Natural Order here already into Crater Hoof. We just want to make sure we've got as many bodies in play as possible, especially because they're very likely to just grab 2 more Field of Deads here. They're going to get a lot of power into play to be able to block, so next turn, the turn just basically plays itself. We crack the fetch, get 2 more zombies, Natural Order into Crater Hoof, and that should just be more than enough to win the game here. So, very happy to set this up on a Malta 5. Obviously, we did need help off the top with that land draw, but managed to get there, which is huge. So, Fierce Empath is nice. It's just an extra creature in play here that we can, just buff our board a little bit extra with the Crater Hoof. And actually, even if we hadn't had the Natural Order, I believe we have enough to just hardcast the Crater Hoof anyway. So even if we'd gone down to 4, we could have potentially won this with that with that Fierce Empath top deck. So we just tutor the Titan, Natural Order into Crater Hoof here, and then that's just going to be more than enough to close the game out. So yeah, mirror match is all about Titan into Crater Hoof. Definitely learned from my mistake game 2. You need to mulligan more aggressively to fast starts in this matchup. So managed to take it down. Very happy on that Malta 5. So round 3 here, I was against a Grixis tempo deck, which was really interesting. And it did look like quite a scary matchup because they had main deck 4 Counterspell, 4 Tishana's Tidebinder. Now, Counterspells I'm not too worried about because we have Sylvanus Scrying to fetch Cavern of Souls, which is really good against them. But Tishana's Tidebinder is a pretty effective card against us that we don't really have good counterplay for, right? If we get a Primeval Titan into play, they can obviously flash in the Tidebinder in response to deny us the trigger, and then it also just stops the Primeval Titan getting any attack triggers afterwards as well. Now, this is definitely a matchup where I kind of wish I had the Throns over the Veil of Summers in the sideboard. This was the one specific matchup where I would have been happier with my slightly older sideboard, but like I said, whilst Uro and Oko are being played alongside counterspells, I think Veil of Summer is the more important card. If that changes and more decks are running, most of the counterspell decks are Grixis, Dimir, or Azorius, then I do think Thrun is the better option going forwards. But while Uro and Oko is still being played alongside counterspells, I think Veil is probably the best option. So this hand I think I'm pretty happy to keep. Obviously, we're a little bit land light, but we do have Sylvan Scrying available here, and we have a lot of top end, right? I think my thoughts here were, we've got a hand that can play through 1 or 2 counterspells pretty nicely, right? We've got Kami, we've got Sylvan Scrying, we've got Natural Order. So, we've got enough threats here that we can hopefully run the opponent out of counterspells. And the other thing is the opponent needs to have counterspells in the first place, right? They were only running 4 counterspell in the main deck. Obviously, they have the Tidebinder as well, but Tidebinder's a bit less of an issue in a way because we still get to keep a 6/6 in play. And I believe that only creatures in the deck were Snapcaster Mage, Orcish Bowmasters, and Tidebinder. They were also running 4 copies of Flame of Anor, so they're kind of a wizard synergy deck as well, looking to take advantage of Snapcaster Mage and Tidebinder to allow them to really maximize Flame of Anor, consistently get both modes on it. So they go for Demonic Cheater on turn 2, and I've got 2 Sylvan Scryings here. I think I potentially make a misplay this turn. I'm not 100% sure on this one, so I believe I go for Sylvan Scrying to pick up a Castle Garenbrig here so that we can potentially try and jam Primeval Titan next turn. And then I was planning to use the other Sylvan Scrying to get Cavern of Souls. Looking back on it, I mean, it's close. I think I'm potentially meant to get Cavern of Souls first. Although having said that, if they tap out here, I really want to be able to cast the Titans. So I'm not really 100% sure what the best line there was necessarily. I mean, again, it's hard to say because, you know, I'm making this commentary with the knowledge of what happened in this game. And so it could just be confirmation bias that they happen to have counter spells to cut me off the Sylvan Scrying. So really interesting options here. We could just jam the Natural Order. We could obviously try and jam the Titan as well. I feel like they probably do have a counter spell here. And the issue with not getting Castle Garenbrig, yeah, they did have the counter spell, and I much prefer burning a counter spell on a Sylvan Scrying than a Natural Order, Primeval Titan, or Titan of Industry. I'm cracking the fetch land now because I don't want it to get stifled by a Tishana's Tidebinder, and then I'm going to get him with the Kami. I mean, having said that, actually, looking back on it, like, I do regret not having access to Cavern of Souls, but with this hand, we wouldn't have been able to cast Primeval Titan until we have 6 lands without this Castle Garenbrig. So looking back on it, I don't actually think I really mind going for the Garenbrig here. Now, I do think I remember we obviously have the choice between going Primeval Titan or Natural Order here, and I believe I went for Natural Order purely because I was worried about Orcish Bowmasters, right? If we go for Primeval Titan and then the opponent has Counterspell into Bowmasters, they can kill the Kami of Bamboo Groves and just cut us off Natural Order entirely. So even though we lose a creature here, I feel like it's better to go for Natural Order because it makes their Orcish Bowmasters much worse, and I would much rather use the Natural Order now while I have the green creature available, if that makes sense. So they have Snapcaster Mage to flashback Counterspell here, which is a little bit rough. Obviously, it does kind of suck losing the Kami, but again, I think it's still correct to go for that line because the longer we keep the Kami on the battlefield, you know, the more live targets they have for Bowmasters. They obviously know our deck list. They know we're playing Natural Order, so they can very easily preemptively flash in the Bowmasters to take out the 1/1 Kami and cut us off the Natural Order. So even though we did kind of get blown out there a little bit, I don't mind doing that. And the nice thing is with our current hand is we can just keep jamming stuff into counter spells until they run out. Now they do have the Mystic Sanctuary off Lorien Revealed, which does allow them to rebuy a counter spell here. Although I forgot the case. So they go for Demonic Shooter, which is interesting, instead of Counterspell. So that kind of says to me they probably have another Counterspell in hand if they're not picking to rebuy the Counterspell. And I'm just going to jam the Primeval Titan here because, you know, I feel like we could have obviously gone land into Titan of Industry, but I would much rather resolve. I feel like getting Fielder Dead online is going to be the way we win this matchup, right? If we can get Fielder Dead online, it's going to be so hard for them to recover from that because they typically just run a bunch of small creatures. They do have the Tidebinder, which, as I said, is obviously very good against us, but the advantage here is we still get a 6/6 in play, and their deck isn't very good at dealing with Primeval Titan, right? They obviously have Flame of an Orb, but that only deals 5 damage, so they kind of need to use Flame of an Orb plus a Lightning Bolt or something like that, which, you know, isn't a bad exchange for them if they have a Wizard in play, because Flame of an Orb still draws them 2 cards while they have Tidebinder and Snapcaster Mage in play, but I still feel like I'm in a reasonable spot here. I do feel, however, that they probably use that Demonic Shooter to find another counterspell. Oh, and I also just remembered, yeah, so the reason they didn't get counterspell off Mystic Sanctuary is because they'd already flashed it back off the Snapcaster Mage. So the Snapcaster Mage exiled the counterspell, which is why they ended up rebuying the Demonic Shooter instead of counterspell, which makes sense. So I'm pretty confident that they've tutored up counterspell here. So my thought process is, which do I want to play out of these two? And I think I would rather them counter the Titan of Industry. As I said, I think Field of the Dead is the card that they're going to struggle to beat the most. Titan of Industry is going to be an issue for them as well, but I feel like Primeval Titan getting Field of the Dead online is going to be a big issue for them. They don't have access to Blood Moon in the main deck anyway, and so I'm going to attack here first, see if I can bait them out. You know, maybe if they've got an Orcish Bowmasters, they might flash that in to kill the Primeval Titan, which then, you know, would mean that shields are down post-combat. So I'm going to jam the Titan of Industry. I fully expect them to have a counterspell here because I assume that's what they tutored for off the Demonic Shooter, which they do. Now I'm going to run out the Foothills, crack it now just so that it doesn't get hit by Tidebinder. Although having said that, looking back at it now, I think I'm probably supposed to wait on cracking that fetch because I would much rather them use a Tidebinder to counter that fetch land than to stifle this second Primeval Titan. So that was probably a slight misplay. I'm probably supposed to bait out the Tidebinder on that fetch land there. I mean, having said that, the opponent is 2-0, and they did play very well in this match, so I think there's a good chance they would probably let that fetch land go, especially at this point in the game when we already have access to a lot of mana. So opponent ships the turn back here, which is kind of concerning because it makes me think they have another counterspell or another Snapcaster Mage potentially. Again, I didn't think this would be too much of an issue because, they're only running 4 copies of counterspell. And so this is kind of the point in the game where I was looking back and thinking, if I had searched Cavern of Souls instead of Castle Garenbrig, I would probably be in a much better position right now. Although having said that, yeah, I mean, I would have probably named Giant off the Cavern of Souls, which would have meant this Primeval Titan resolves. But, they do have Dig Through Time here for 2 mana. They have exactly enough cards in the graveyard to be able to search. So now they can dig for either a counterspell or a Tishana's Tidebinder as well. Now, having said that, obviously we would prefer them to find the Tidebinder because then we get an extra 6/6 in play. But, they are finding a lot of answers to our big creatures. I feel like if we get one Primeval Titan trigger, we're probably just in a great position to win the game. Because as I said, I don't think they really have a good way to beat Field of the Dead once it's online. So I do believe they find an answer here. They do find a counterspell, which, obviously that's a little bit rough. We do have the Natural Order in hand here, though. So, we can potentially, we don't really want to use Natural Order on this Titan because the 6/6 body is racing them fairly quickly now, even though it's been shut off by the Tidebinder activation. And I believe, so they go Flame of Anor here, and they tap out to kill the Primeval Titan. I can't remember if they use Orcish Bowmasters or a Lightning Bolt here, but this is a pivotal point in the game. They kill the Primeval Titan here, and now we have a 1-turn window. If we can find any green creature off the top, we can then Natural Order into Primeval Titan, and I think the game is just completely locked up at this point. Okay, so they do use Lightning Bolt. They're not running Spell Pierce. They're not running any 1-mana counters in the main deck as far as I'm aware. And unfortunately, we draw a Sunken Citadel instead. So that was the key turning point in the game, I think. We can gate to Manaborn here, but even if we find like a Colony Garden, we don't have enough mana to play the Natural Order this turn. We do find a Stormceld Vanguard, which is a threat, right? That is a creature that we can potentially Natural Order, or just use to apply pressure if we do draw another cheap green creature. But I feel like that was the key turning point in the game. If we draw a green creature off the top, I'm pretty sure that's just the game locked up for us. But now we're in a tough spot because not only has the opponent used Flame of Anor, they've also used Dig Through Time. So I assume they'll have, good answers to what we've got here, I think. So unfortunately we draw another land off the top, so not drawing particularly well. I jam the Stormceld Vanguard here, just got to hope they don't have a counterspell. And they don't have a counterspell, so my thoughts now is, if they had a counterspell they would have countered that for sure. So I'm just going to jam the Natural Order here. They could obviously have the Tidebinder, which I kind of expect them to have because they do have a full grip here, but I feel like this is the best route to victory. There is potentially an argument to waiting. Right, we can potentially just cast the Stormceld Vanguard and then hope to draw a green creature off the top for Natural Order next turn, which might have been slightly better. So they do have the Tidebinder here, so we do kind of get punished for that play. I'm still not 100% sure which line is better, to be honest, because they do have a lot of cards in hand. I feel like the longer I wait, if they've got Brainstorm, if they've got Dig Through Time, if they've got ways like Flame of Anor to keep the cards flowing, they are just going to, the longer I wait, the more likely they are to draw into something like a Tidebinder. So we already know from the Stormceld Vanguard there that they don't have a counterspell. And so my logic was basically that if I go for Natural Order now, they have to have the Tidebinder in hand, which is not unlikely that they'd have it, but I feel like the longer I wait, the more likely they are to be able to find it. For example, they had a Dig Through Time there, so if I'd waited a turn, they would have just cast the Dig Through Time during the end step instead, and probably found another counterspell or Tidebinder there. So they then flash in the Bowmasters. We're under a ton of pressure here, right? We're going down to 1 currently. If they have a Lightning Bolt or another Orcish Bowmasters, we're just dead. So even though it was a risky line going for the Natural Order there, I still feel it was correct because they tend to have the inevitability as the game goes along. And then they have the second Bowmaster, so that was close. We had a 1-turn window with the Natural Order there where we could have forced it through. So sideboarding here, the key cards that they have in their sideboard that we need to be wary of are Thoughtseize, Blood Moon, and Mystical Dispute. I believe they have 3 Thoughtseize, 2 Blood Moon, 2 or 3 Mystical Disputes. So we definitely want the Veil of Summers here because they're good against Counterspell and Dispute and Thoughtseize. And then we want to keep in all of our anti-Blood Moon cards. They're only running 2 Blood Moons, so, you know, we don't have to bring in Get Lost or anything like that, I don't think, or Haywire Might even, because we still have access to Stormcast Vanguard off the Fierce Empath. I don't think we really need to go too overboard on Answers to Blood Moon when they've only got 2 copies, but I feel like Veil of Summer is the main thing here. I end up cutting the Titan of Industry here as well because we're cutting Natural Order, right? Titan of Industry, the only real way that we're going to be cheating that into play is off Natural Order, I think. You know, it's very unlikely that we're going to... I guess we could still, you know, tutor it up off the Fierce Empath and hardcast it, but if we want an answer to Blood Moon off Fierce Empath, we're always going to be searching the Stormcast Vanguard. Obviously, it is, you know, Titan of Industry is good at stabilizing and blocking, but, you know, we're either going to be tutoring Primeval Titan or Stormcast Vanguard off the Fierce Empath. So I think it's fine to cut the Titan of Industry there when we're cutting the Natural Order. But this is definitely one of the trickier matchups. I think tempo decks running Blood Moon, counter spells, discard spells are sometimes good against us. I mean, as you saw there, you know, it was pretty close. We did have a 1-10 window, so it's you know, it's definitely a close matchup. I think it's pretty even. Post sideboard is definitely in their favor because they have more cards that are relevant in the matchup, like Blood Moon, like Thoughtseize, like Mystical Dispute, for example. But, you know, we have a lot of ways to force through our game plan, especially with stuff like Cavern of Souls. So this hand's interesting, right? We do have the acceleration, but we don't have an untapped land on turn 1. We do have Sylvan Scrying, but, you know, we don't have a third land to put into play off Grazer here. So we could go Garenbrig, West, you know, turn 1, Westphal Abbey, Sylvan Scrying on turn 2. But then we're not really taking advantage of the Grazer here. So I think I like mulliganing this hand. And then this hand honestly isn't much better at all. Obviously we've got a lot more lands, which is, you know, you do need to keep hitting land drops in this deck, but we don't really have much going on else other than this. I do end up keeping this. I don't want to go below 6 against the Thoughtseize deck post sideboard, especially because they got counter spells as well. And we do have Castle Garenbrig, so we can use Sylvan Scrying to get Sunken Citadel to potentially go for turn 4 Titan if we do draw it off the top. I think my thought process here is whether I want to put back Field of the Dead or Westphal Abbey. I think I end up putting back the Field of the Dead because I wanted Westphal Abbey as another untapped land, but looking back on it now, I think Field of the Dead is probably more useful here. We have, you know, 2 untapped lands, 2 tapped lands if we put back the Westphal Abbey. And obviously, you know, with a 4-land hand, if the game goes on long, I think Field of the Dead getting online naturally is good. So I think, looking back on it now, I did make a mistake there. But obviously, I'm making this, you know, analysis after the game when I already know what happens. So it's difficult to remain completely impartial, you know, with that. So once upon a time here, really hoping to try and find a Grazer or a Titan or a Fierce Empath. Unfortunately, we just find another land, but we do find a Sunken Citadel, which is nice. So now we can go Citadel on 2 and still hold open the Veil of Summer to protect us against Thoughtseize. Maybe there's an argument there to just go for Sylvan Scrying while the opponent doesn't have access to Counterspell to try and get something like a Cavern of Souls. But with Veil of Summer in hand, I don't really feel like we necessarily need to get Cavern of Souls. You know, we could potentially just go for something like a Boseiju instead, which is, I believe, what I went for here. Just get Boseiju as an answer to Blood Moon, because we've already got the basic forest here. So, and then we can go for Grazer again. You know, they do get a 1-turn window to potentially Thoughtseize here, but we have very little going on in our hand anyway. So if they take a turn off to Thoughtseize, then that's not too much of a big issue. Again, we could have potentially gone for Cavern of Souls off the Sylvan Scrying there. But, you know, with this much mana available, we've already got Castle Garenbrig plus Sunken Citadel. So if we ever draw, you know, a Primeval Titan off the top, for example, then we can already just go Titan plus Veil. And their only counter spells in the 75 were 4th counter spell in the main deck and 2 or 3 Mystical Dispute in the sideboard, which, you know, obviously they could have double counter spell, but the fact they chose not to shock in the Steam Vents there kind of telegraphs that they probably only have 1. So we do get to activate the Gate to Manaborn, and we do find a Fierce Empath. So now we do have access to the Primeval Titan, which is pretty big here. And so I'm just calculating whether I have enough mana here to go for Fierce Empath into Titan and have Veil of Summer back up. So I believe we're 1 mana short, right? If I go for Fierce Empath here, Actually, no, wait, I'm 3 mana short of doing that. So I believe I just jam the Fierce Empath here. Again, they could obviously have Counterspell. They could also have Tidebinder as a way to stop the Fierce Empath trigger, which would also be a pretty good line. And the annoying thing here is that, as I mentioned, Veil of Summer doesn't stop Tidebinder. It only stops countering spells, not countering abilities, which is kind of rough. If Veil of Summer countered abilities, then it would be sick. Yeah, I think I'm even just double checking that the card doesn't counter abilities here. So unfortunately, they do counter the Fierce Empath trigger, which does stop us getting off Titan. And now we can already see why it would have been better for me to keep Field of the Dead over this Westvale Abbey, because if I had Field of the Dead in play here, we could be getting it online naturally next turn already. So again, I think that small decision in mulliganing, keeping the Westvale Abbey over the Field of the Dead, is already making a pretty big difference here. And the nice thing about Field of the Dead against Tidebinder is they can obviously stifle the trigger, but it doesn't shut off the Field of the Dead ability, because Tidebinder, I believe, only stops creatures and artifacts. Stops them, removes all of their abilities after you counter the activated ability. So opponent does have the Blood Moon here, so I'm very glad that I ended up getting the Boseiju instead of the Cavern of Souls, but this is a situation where I should have been more careful with the auto tapper. I should have used one of the other green lands to cast the Fierce Empath, because now we don't have a basic available, or we don't have a basic untapped. We're forced to Boseiju during the main phase before we lose the floated mana, which then gives the opponent access to an additional mana here. And I believe they had a second Blood Moon here, right? They drew both of the Blood Moons, so had we tapped, for example, the Sunken Citadel for the Fierce Empath instead of the basic Forest, we could have not had to float the mana, waited till their end step, Boseiju during the end step, and then they wouldn't have the ability to use the extra Blood Moon here. Thankfully, we have the Kami here, and I don't think it would have made too much of a difference, because we don't have a second answer to Blood Moon anyway, so they probably would have just cast this second Blood Moon next turn. Just overall, we didn't draw particularly well this game. We did need some help off the top. We had ramp, but no top ends. We obviously would have preferred to keep the Field of the Dead. We would have got the Field of the Dead online a little bit earlier, but how the game played out, I'm not sure it would have made too much of a difference, to be honest, because we didn't have an answer for the second Blood Moon. That second Blood Moon would have shut off the Field of the Dead regardless. So I feel like even if we kept the Field of the Dead, and even if we were careful with the auto tapper and didn't allow them to cast the extra Blood Moon the same turn, they probably would have just resolved the second Blood Moon anyway. So this was definitely an interesting game. There were a couple of points where I definitely think I could have played better or just more carefully in general. Should have made a slightly different call on the mulligan decision. But the main thing I want to highlight here is just that this definitely is a matchup where this Veil of Summer would have been so much better if it was a Thrun. Right, if we'd have been able to get a Thrun down on turn 4 or 5, we would have been applying so much more pressure here. And they didn't really have any good answers. They did have Shielded Edict in the sideboard, but we've had the Grazer and the Empath in play for many turns. So they would have had to have... First of all, they would have had to bring in the Shielded Edict, which they probably would have done if they'd seen Thrun in our sideboard, because it's open deck list. So this is definitely a matchup where I would have preferred to have Thrun over Veil of Summer. So if this sort of deck starts to become more popular, which it very well could do because it did do very well in this tournament, then it may be better to run 3 Thrun over the 4 Veil of Summer, and then you also free up another sideboard slot there. But I still feel on balance, especially against a wide metagame, like if you're playing the ladder, it's probably best to go for Veil of Summer so you don't just get blown out by Oko and Uro. But again, yeah, like I said, if decks like this do become popular, I could very well see an argument to going up to Thrun instead of Veil of Summer. So now the opponent's really turning the corner. As we saw from the early game, they did have a ton of interaction. They've been playing very carefully, very well. Now we're definitely on the back foot here. Blood Moon is in play. We don't have an answer. We do have triple Forest, so we can potentially draw Stormcald. Vanguard isn't out. We did boil out the Titan of Industry, so that's not an out anymore. Primeval Titan also, is just a reasonable threat to put into play here. But, it's just a 6/6 on the Blood Moon. I guess it does fetch more lands, but it doesn't, we don't get Field of the Dead online, really, so... Again, I feel like I was a little bit unfortunate at this game. We did draw a lot of lands. We didn't draw much top end, and the opponent did happen to draw both of their 2 Blood Moons. I feel like, as I said, if we had kept Field of the Dead instead of the Westvale Abbey, and we had drawn an answer to this second Blood Moon, or they just hadn't drawn the second one, we could have just got there through just fair Field of the Dead beats. I do feel like this matchup is probably slightly better for us than it looked here, but opponent did play very well. We did make a couple of mistakes for sure. Now they have the Snapcaster Mage. I'm just going to Veil here to see what I draw off the top. Field of Dead, so another land off the top, unfortunately. So opponent does take it down, but they did play very well. And Tidebinder is a very strong card against Titan for sure, as you saw in this game. So we move on to 2-1. Very well played by the opponent. Okay, so going into round 4 against Domain Zoo, which I'm fairly happy to see. I think Zoo is a pretty good matchup for Titan. This build noticeably wasn't running Stubborn Denial at all. I believe instead the cards that we need to be wary of here are 2 Tishana's Tidebinder in the main and 2 Spell Pierce. They also have 2 copies of Tishana's Tidebinder in the sideboard, but honestly, I feel happier to see that, right? I think, Stubborn Denial is very good against Natural Order. Spell Pierce is much easier for us to play around, especially as the game goes long. But either way, I do feel like this matchup is typically pretty good for the Titan deck in general. They really need to have a counterspell at a key point, and obviously if we can often just set up hard casting the Titan if we have Sunken Citadel plus Gus or Gambriggs. So overall, I feel pretty confident in this matchup, but Zoo does have access to some pretty explosive starts. They can get a lot of power and play quickly. And very importantly, they have very good reach in the mid to late game as well. They have Lightning Bolt and Tribal Flames that can finish you off if you end up stabilizing at a low life total. So, and this list, unsurprisingly, is running 4 of each. So interestingly, the opponent just passes back here. So they didn't have a Territorial Kavu or a Nishoba Brawler on turn 2, which I'm very happy to see. They are running 4 copies of Orcish Bowmasters, 2 Tidebinder and 2 Spell Pierce here, which is, could obviously be holding on to any of those cards. So they activate the Deathrite Shaman, and they do have the Tidebinder for the Fierce Empath trigger, which I think is fine, with this Natural Order in hand and another Primeval Titan in hand. I feel like we're basically forcing them to have a bunch of counterspells here, right? Again, they do run 2 Spell Pierce, which I am concerned about, especially going for this Natural Order here, but we're forcing them to have a 2 of. They already have one of their 2 of. So I think even if the opponent keeps open the breeding pool here, with this Primeval Titan in hand, I think I'm supposed to just go Natural Order, even if they hold open the blue mana. If they have a Spell Pierce, then we just jam the Primeval Titan next turn. I don't think we really gain too much by waiting. But then the opponent taps out of their breeding pool mana, so they don't have access to blue here. Now, we do give them access to blue off the Deathrite Shaman, but I presume if they had Spell Pierce here, they would probably just hold it open rather than casting the Deathrite Shaman. And regardless, even if they did just leave the blue mana open, I think I'm supposed to just jam the Natural Order here because we don't want to give them extra time. And, especially with a backup threat with this Primeval Titan in hand, you want to put them to the test. You want to make them have it because they can play the tempo role pretty well. So here I go for Field of the Dead and Westvale Abbey, which I quite like doing because next turn if we can attack with the Primeval Titan, then we can just transform the Westvale Abbey on defense. So they do have the Lowland Binding for the Titan here, which is fine. As you can see, we've obviously got the backup Titan. We can get Field of Dead online immediately next turn anyway. And then after playing the Primeval Titan, the nice thing about having Westvale Abbey the following turn is that we can transform it and it has haste, so we can immediately attack in. And this is one of those matchups where the lifelink from Westvale Abbey really makes a big difference because it can put us completely out of range of Lightning Bolt and Tribal Flames. Now, having said that, the opponent, we're at 15. We're not really in any concern for getting burnt out here, but I am still a little bit concerned that they're going to have another Tishana's Tidebinder, which does limit our ability to develop Field of Dead tokens to the board, but get to resolve it, which is absolutely huge. Get 2 more Field of the Deads, and now this game is pretty much just wrapped up, right? They have no way to come back from this far behind. We already have 7 tokens in play. We can obviously crack the fetch to create 3 more. So this game is already pretty much locked up, which is pretty big. And this is the way this matchup goes a lot of the time. They really need to have early aggression paired with a way to stop your Titan to be able to win. Now they do make the correct decision of trying to apply pressure to our life total with the Deathrite Shaman here. I think that is correct, right? They need to just try and get us low on life total and then try and burn us out. Double Tribal Flames would be very scary here, but we've already got the Westvale Abbey in play. We've already got more than enough tokens in play. So that's just a good kind of insurance against that sort of line. So one of the 2 cards in their hand is a land. So yeah, basically no way they can recover from this now. I'm pretty happy cracking the fetch. Get 3 more tokens, and then We can obviously activate the Westvale Abbey and attack, or we've got this natural order here anyway, which is just going to close the game out, right? We can natural order for Crater Hoof, and then even if they have Spell Pierce, which is the only counter spell they're running in the main deck, we have way more than enough. Not going to crack the fetch because we don't really need to. We can just natural order, sacrifice the Fierce Empath, get the Crater Hoof, and then we've got way more than lethal. So pretty confident in this matchup. Post sideboard, I think the only things they really need to be aware of here is that they've got... Well, they do actually have a few counter spells, so they've got 2 Reprieve, 2 Spell Pierce in the sideboard, and 2 Tishana's Tidebinder as well. But I don't really think I want to make too many changes, to be honest. You know, we could consider bringing Veil of Summer, but that doesn't really help against Reprieve. And Veil of Summer is only really going to be stopping Spell Pierce out of their list. It doesn't stop Tishana's Tidebinder, so... I'm considering cutting the Stormcurl Vanguard here, but I actually think Vanguard is reasonable because it answers Leyline Binding, right? We saw last game that they used Leyline Binding to answer Titan, so having access to Stormcurl Vanguard as a way to answer Leyline Binding seems pretty useful. But outside of that, I don't think there's really anything that I'd want to bring in this matchup, so I'm just going to skip forward to the end of sideboarding. So going into game 2, as I mentioned, the main cards that we need to be wary of are potentially Reprieve, potentially Spell Pierce. I assume they'll definitely have the 2 extra copies of Tishana's Tidebinder in here. So those are the main cards that we need to be wary of. But again, I still feel pretty confident about the matchup overall. Although having said that, being on the draw can be a potential issue because the main way that you do lose this from the Titan side is if they go like, you know, Deathrite Shaman or Wild Castle into a Kavu with Counterspell backup. Now again, them not having access to Stubborn Denial does make that more difficult to set up, and again, Stubborn Denial doesn't really help if we're able to set up Castle Gathering plus Sunken Citadel, which we don't have here. You know, we do have the Terminal Acceleration, we do have double Primeval Titan, but I think my hope here was to try and hit something like a Castle Garenbrig off this Once Upon a Time. Unfortunately, we don't hit the Castle Garenbrig, so I think my decision here is whether I want to go for a Sunken Citadel so that we can potentially draw a Castle Garenbrig, or potentially another piece of acceleration. Now, I think if one of these Primeval Titans was another land, I would probably grab like an Arboreal Grazer here, just as another piece of acceleration. But with only, with only 3 lands in hand, I don't think getting another Grazer or Kami does that much, because if we miss a land drop off the top, it doesn't actually accelerate us at all. Whereas getting this other land now suddenly turns Castle Garenbrig off the top into a really good draw. And now we draw the Sylvan Scrying, which is perfect. So now we just go for Scrying, grab our Castle Garenbrig, and then we can just go for Titan the following turn. And the only way that they can stop that now is via Reprieve. So I play the Castle Garenbrig, which I think is probably a mistake. I think I'm supposed to play the Windswept Heath and crack it immediately to get a tap land to play around Tishana's Tidebinder. So that was a slight misplay on my part. I should have gone for the Windswept Heath first. Plus, we're now revealing that we have Citadel plus Garenbrig, which might change their game plan, right? If they now know that we can represent casting Primeval Titan next turn, they're more likely to want to hold up something like a Reprieve or a Tishana's Tidebinder, where if we don't have that, they might feel more safe tapping out. So I think I was probably supposed to just play a fetch land and crack it there immediately. Now, I don't think we ended up getting punished here, thankfully, but this is the sort of thing that you need to be wary of if you're not used to playing against Tishana's Tidebinder, or Stifle as well. You know, I have seen a slight increase in Stifle decks recently because of its pairing with Uro, and I know Aspiring Spike, who played in this tournament, was playing Stifle Uro as well, I believe. We do thankfully get to resolve the Titan, though. They don't have the Tidebinder, so definitely going to get the Field of the Dead, and then just debating the second land here. We could potentially go for Blast Zone, which is obviously very good against their current board. Could obviously go for the Westvale Abbey as well. I think on this board... Oh, interesting. So I go... Okay, so I think I was saying that I think Blast Zone was potentially the better card, but I don't mind Bojuka Bog exiling my own graveyard, which is the line I went for here, because it removes the fetch land from the graveyard, which means that we deny them the mana off the Deathrite Shaman, and it looks like they're kind of struggling with the mana situation over there, right? They don't have a way to buff the Wildnacuttles, they're both stuck at 1/1s, and so exiling the graveyard to get rid of the fetch land cuts them off mana. So yeah, that was definitely the right line. Very happy with how I played that game, apart from the missequencing with the lands. So round 5 here, we're against a very interesting Gruul aggro deck that I've not seen before. So it's basically running a bunch of Prowess creatures and Dragon's Rage Channeler and stuff like Jar Silt, and then a bunch of burn spells and ways to pump their creatures. So they're running stuff like Scale Up, which was pretty scary because, you know, I think this deck is typically good against aggro, but they seem you know, very like hyper aggressive. Now this hand looks really solid though. We're on the play. We got Arboreal Grazer, we got Citadel and Garenbrig. We obviously are missing top end. We would love to draw a Titan, but against this sort of deck, I feel like Generous Ent is pretty good at stabilizing anyway, right? We can get down a 5/7 with Reach that also produces a food token. So this is actually a matchup where I'm pretty happy to just, you know, hardcast Generous Ent on turn 3, which is going to be very difficult for them to attack past. But yeah, they do seem like a deck that's very good at forcing through damage. They have 2 scale up, 4 Tarka's commands, and they have quite a lot of creatures as well. So I'm a bit worried about starts where they can go wide very quickly, but winning the die roll here against an aggro deck is very big game. So getting to lead on a Grazer is also big. That, you know, helps us soak up a bit of damage in case they have something like a turn 1 Monastery Swiftspear, for example. And then it's interesting what we're going to go for Sylvan Scrying. I think the obvious pick would be something like a Radiant Fountain just to gain us a little bit of life here. So they go DRC into Bauble, which is obviously, you know, a pretty good start from them because that gets them reasonably close to getting Chandler online here. And we draw Kami off the top, so I think, you know, we can either go for Kami to try and accelerate here, or we can go for Sylvan Scrying. I'm not sure what the best land to get here would be. As I said, there's Radiant Fountain, but we could also potentially get Blast Zone, which is, I think, what I go for here, as just a way to take out, you know, potential other 1-drops they could play. They are running a lot of 1-drops in this list, so if I have a look at the list here, they've got 4 Dragon's Rage Chandler, 4 Swift Spear, 4 Soulscar Mage, so I like getting Blast Zone here as just a way to just crack and potentially wipe their whole board, right? The only creatures that they're running that are bigger than the 1-drops are 4 Eidolon of the Great Revel and 3 Jarsoul, so Blast Zone seems like a really solid pickup here, just as a way to potentially just, you know, work as a, I was going to say a one-sided sweeper. We do have 2 1-drops of our own in play, but Blast Zone is going to hit them a lot more than it hits us. But either way, even without Titan, I do like our position here. You know, Generous Ent, even if we have to crack the Blast Zone, we have enough mana to play the Generous Ent, and it's, you know, 5/7, produces a food token, gains us a bit of life. So now that the Blast Zone is face off, they kind of unsurprisingly go for the Eidolon here. So this is an interesting turn. We draw a Fierce Empath off the top. There is still a temptation to just go for Generous Ent to stabilize, because you really don't want to avoid, you know, you really don't want to take any unnecessary damage against a deck like this, but I think I probably do want to try and set up for a Titan next turn. We could obviously also go for Titan of Industry here, potentially, which is obviously very strong at stabilizing, gaining 5 life, putting a 4/4 into play. I believe I just go for a Primeval Titan. Yeah, okay, that makes sense because, you know, we're very good at blocking the ground up, and then I do end up cycling the Generous Ent here, which is nice because it means that we can also then cast the Primeval Titan next turn and fetch, you know, get a bunch more Field of Dead tokens, because if we play the Titan when we already have 6 unique lands in play, then we can just get, you know, a bunch of Field of Dead tokens straight away. Whereas if we only had 5 lands of different names, then we can't get 2 Field of the Deads. Although having said that, the opponent does already have Delirium online, so I think there's a chance that we might be incentivized to get Bajuka Bog anyway here. So maybe it would have been slightly better to hold on to the Generous Ent just as an additional blocker. Not 100% sure on that one, to be honest. But either way, I'm definitely going to block with both creatures here because we're going to be able to get a bunch of blockers in play off this Primeval Titan. So now we go for the Titan. We're still at 15 here, so I could just see an argument for going for 2 Field of the Deads here, which is what I think I do, yeah. I'm at 15. They've only got 2 cards in hand, so I'm not too worried about them forcing extra damage through, right? The main card that I'm worried about them forcing damage through with is a Tarka's Command, and with only 1 flying creature, you know, that is going to deal a fair amount of damage, but I feel like just getting 2 Field of Deads online is going to be more important. So yeah, opponent just scoops it up there. So I think being on the play was very important there. Could have also seen the argument for holding on to Generous and maybe, but not 100% sure. So in terms of sideboarding, they don't really have anything in their list that we're too concerned about. Their sideboard is Unholy Heat, Runestone, Cindervines, Pithing Needle, and End the Festivities, none of which really do anything against us. So I think at this point I'm just debating whether I want to potentially trim the Stormcald Vanguard, because, you know, it can obviously kill Eidolon of the Great Revel, but there's not really too much else in their deck. And it also hits Kumano Faces Kakazan as well. So I think I'm just looking at their deck list and trying to figure out whether I want to bring in Get Lost potentially, whether I want to bring in Haywire Might for an additional bit of incidental life gain perhaps. But I don't think I make any changes to the deck going into sideboarding. Maybe there's an argument to cut the Stormcloud Vanguard for a Get Lost or a Haywire Might, but I think I just run it back. So I'm just going to edit the rest of sideboarding out. So going into game 2 here, obviously being on the draw is going to make a big difference against this sort of deck. So I think we just have to mulligan to a fast start, right? We need to be able to get a big creature into play to try and stabilize as quickly as possible. So we do have Generous Ent here to get us a basic, and I think we have to keep this because this is a potential turn 3 Titan, right? We can go Cavern, cycle the Generous Ent, then as long as we draw another land off the top, we can go, Forest, Kami, cheat, get an extra land into play, and then potentially go for Natural Order the following turn. So this is potentially a turn 3 Titan, or even a Titan of Industry. Okay, so we find a Sylvan Scrying off the top. So I think my decision here is whether I go for Field of Dead or Cavern of Souls on turn 1. And I think, it's close. I could see an argument to both lines, to be honest. I think I prefer going for Cavern of Souls here because we're basically guaranteed to be cycling this Generous Ent. So I think it makes sense to cycle the Ent on turn 1 to give us more options going into turn 2 depending on what we draw. So opponent on Channeler Bauble into Abundant Harvest. So already got Delirium Online on turn 2, which is pretty crazy. So they are already applying a decent amount of pressure, especially if they follow up with another 1-drop creature here. Thankfully we have Kami as a potential blocker. Okay, so Commander Faces Kakazan is obviously a scary card. That can apply a lot of pressure, but I'm actually happier to see that than like a Swift Spear or a Soulscar Mage, for example. So it puts us down to 16. We're definitely going to cycle the Generous Ent here, and we're definitely going to get a basic. We don't want to be shocking any unnecessary damage here if we can avoid it. And then we draw a fetch land off the top, which is interesting. So I think we just go for the Kami here, which is slightly mana inefficient, right? We do leave ourselves without, we don't fully use all of our mana here, but I think that's fine. If the Kami survives, we can just go for Natural Order here, which is pretty big. So I think that's my current game plan. If they do kill the Kami, then it's a little bit awkward because then we have to probably Sylvan Scrying for a Castle Garenbrig, or I guess we can just play the Fierce Empath and then try Natural Order the following turn. But it just depends whether the opponent wants to prioritize using the burn spells against the Kami of Bambi Groves or not. So they go for an Atarka's Command here, which does put us down a lot of damage, right? We take 3, and then we go down to 5 off the attacks. Thankfully, we do get to Natural Order here, and I believe I go for Natural Order into Titan of Industry, which is, very, very important at stabilizing against decks like this. Because if we go for Natural Order into Primeval Titan, that just doesn't stabilize us at all, right? We're going down to 1 off the Chandler attack, and then we're taking 2 off the Swift Spear, and then 2 off the Commander Faces Kakazan as well. So Titan of Industry is not only insanely good to be able to give you an out to Blood Moon, but it's also really good in spots like this where you just need to stabilize against an aggro deck. Because, like I said, if you're casting Titan on turn 3 or 4, you're not getting Field of Dead online immediately. You normally have to wait until your first attack off the Titan to do that. So I feel fairly confident in this spot, right? Because next turn we can potentially go Sylvan Scrying for a Radiant Fountain, buff our life total even more, and then potentially go for Fierce Empath. We're also getting reasonably close to being able to just hardcast this Titan as well. So they go for the Swift Spear, they attack with everything, and we just block the Chandler and the Swift Spear here. But then they have the Atarka's Command here, which is, I believe, exactly lethal. So this was kind of a rough one to take. As soon as I resolved the Titan of Industry, I was fairly confident in stabilizing there, but the opponent has exactly lethal. This is kind of what's scary about this deck. We don't have any interactions, so when they have draws like that, or they have draws with scale up, they can potentially just force through a bunch of extra damage here. So I think here I'm definitely considering cutting the Stormcloud Vanguard because it doesn't really do too much. Obviously it can stop Eidolon, it can kill Commander Faces Kakazan, and then it's obviously a very big creature. They are a red deck, so they're reliant on damage-based removal to kill our creatures, and a 7 toughness creature is so difficult for them to answer. So in retrospect, I do think I like keeping in the Stormcloud Vanguard here because it does provide us with not only a way to kill Eidolon and Kumano, but also just a big creature that we can ramp into off Citadel plus Garenbrig. So unfortunately this hand's a mulligan, right? Only a 1-lander. This hand, we have Sunken Citadel, Garenbrig, and Fierce Empath, so I think this has to be a keep. I assume I keep this one, yeah. And then putting back Cavern of Souls makes sense. Counter spells just don't matter in this matchup at all. So I'm going to lead on Once Upon a Time, try and find a Grazer or a Cameo of Bamboo Groves, and we find the Grazer here, which is huge. So now we have a turn 3 Titan on the play, which is huge. This is why Once Upon a Time is so good at just helping assemble whatever you're missing. So now we can go for turn 1 Grazer, get Sunken Citadel into play, and then next turn we go for the Fierce Empath on 2, find the Primeval Titan, and then just hardcast the Titan on turn 3, which should be good enough, I imagine, right? We can get Westvale Abbey. Oh, we've already got Westvale Abbey, sorry, but we can get like Radiant Fountain or a Colney Garden, and then get Field of Dead online, and then we can transform Westvale Abbey, swing in for 9. It's basically be impossible for the opponent to win from that point. So very, very confident about my chances this game. I feel like the opponent needed to have exactly Swift Spear. You know, we were close to winning game 2 if they didn't have exactly Swift Spear into Ataka's command. So game 3 here, I feel pretty confident. So there is an interesting choice about whether I want to block here. Typically when I'm about to play a Titan, I do like blocking just to soak up any unnecessary damage, but you know, we're at 19. I don't mind going down to 17, and there's a chance that we would want to use the Fierce Empath to use to transform into Westvale Abbey. There's also a chance that as the turns go on, they buff their creatures even bigger than this, and they're also pretty incentivized to potentially kill the Empath with one of their burn spells because we represent using natural order. So not blocking also incentivizes them to waste something like a Lightning Bolt on the Empath rather than going face with it. So here I go Field of Dead and Blaststone, which I think is a good choice. Could have also gone for Radiant Fountain or Colney Garden. Also reasonable choices there, but you know, getting Blaststone in play when they have 2 Soulscar Mages as their only threats is always going to be a good choice, I think. But yeah, I feel very confident here. You know, we have multiple options available. We can fetch Radiant Fountain off the Primeval Titan. We can potentially transform the Westvale Abbey. We could crack the Blaststone and just wipe their entire board of creatures. I think the key here, though, is to not block the Soulscar Mages. Obviously, they could have, like, triple Lightning Bolt or Lightning Bolt into Ataka's command, but the obvious big thing with Soulscar Mages, they can shrink your creatures when they deal burn damage to it. So in combination with blocking, they could take out the Primeval Titan here. And I think ensuring that we don't, you know, ensuring that we get a first attack with the Primeval Titan should ensure that we win the game here, I think. And I am kind of glad that I waited on blocking with the Empath here, because had we just chumped with the Empath last turn, if we don't block with the Primeval Titan here and they have Lightning Bolt into Ataka's command, that is a lot of damage coming through. Then we're potentially just vulnerable to multiple burn spells off the top to kill us. Because the annoying thing, well, the annoying thing in this spot with Westvale Abbey is we can't activate it proactively, right? We would love to be able to transform it and attack with it immediately, but we just don't have enough creatures in play to do that at this point, so we kind of have to wait. So yeah, opponent goes for Ataka's command, so Fierce Empath soaks up a lot of the damage there. And then going to get the Wooded Foothills in play just to get Field of Dead online. And then it'll be interesting to see whether I get Radiant Fountain here or not. I think the disciplined play here would be going for Field of Dead plus Radiant Fountain. Oh, we've already got a Field of Dead in hand, so we're kind of forced to do that anyway. I think even if I had the third Field of Dead in the deck, I probably would have gone for the Radiant Fountain there anyway, because I feel like, you know, we're getting 5 tokens in play here. The only way that we're realistically going to lose this game from this point is if the opponent just kills us with burn spells. And so Radiant Fountain just basically shuts off the main out for the opponent here. But now we've got Westvale Abbey open. We've also got Blaststone open. I feel like there's basically no way that we could lose this one. You know, we can either sacrifice 5 of these zombie tokens to get a huge blocker, or just crack the Blaststone. And they just scoop it up, so we move on to 4-1. Okay, so going into round 6, and we're against Rakdos Midrange, which I'm really happy to see. So this deck is basically built to go over the top of midrange decks. Now, having said that, the opponent does have some reasonable tools. They've got 2 Blood Moon in the main deck, 1 in the sideboard, and 1 Necromancer, 1 Ashiok Dreamrender in the sideboard as well. So they do have tools to fight us, but, you know, these sorts of midrange decks are exactly the sorts of decks that we want to be facing. So this hand looks good to me. You know, we don't quite have a turn 3 Titan, but we do have a turn 4 Titan here off these Castle Garum Briggs, and early acceleration off the Cameo of Bamboo Groves. And then obviously the opponent's on a discard spell deck as well, so we don't want to mulligan too aggressively. We've also got a basic here in case they do draw their 2 of Blood Moon, and we can obviously use the Fierce Empath to find Stormcurl Vanguard as an answer as well, so I'm very happy with this hand. Obviously it would be more ideal if we were on the play here, but I don't think this is a matchup where play draw really matters too much from our point of view. You know, I think this is probably just going to come down to how many discard spells they've got, whether they find the early Blood Moons or not. Now, having said that, they are a one-ring Shieldred version of midrange, which I think is more scary than most of the leaner, smaller builds, because that does give them a stronger mid to late game, right? If they can, you know, if they do draw like double Blood Moon and kind of cut us off, and then they start pulling ahead on one ring, that's potentially scary, but I'm still pretty confident, especially with this hand, right? We do have an out to Blood Moon. We do have a turn 4 Titan here. We can also use Sylvan Scrying next turn now. That's a pretty good draw off the top in order to find a Sunken Citadel. Now, I choose here to put the Westvale Abbey in play just to keep the Castle Garenbrig hidden, because I'm pretty sure with this hand that I'm going to be going Sylvan Scrying for Sunken Citadel next turn, and putting the Garenbrig in play will kind of telegraph to the opponent that we have a turn 3 Titan available, or turn 3 Titan coming, so I like putting Westvale Abbey in play first, just to, you know, kind of conceal information a little bit. So opponent leads on Lightning Bolt, taking out the Kami, which makes sense, because that cuts us off natural order, so good play from the opponent there. See what they got on turn 2 here. But yeah, I mean, obviously Fierce Empath is a more efficient use of our mana, but I think with this Primeval Titan in play, we're probably just better off going Sylvan Scrying into Sunken Citadel, unless they go for Thoughtseize, obviously. And the nice thing about this hand is we are pretty resilient to Thoughtseize here, right? If they do Thoughtseize away the Primeval Titan, we can just jam a Fierce Empath next turn, and then we're forcing them to have another one, right? And obviously, you know, Inquisition doesn't quite get it done, although opponent's not running Inquisition in their main deck. They are also running 4 Dark Ritual, though. They're running kind of like very similar to Mistman's most recent builder deck. Actually, this might be a copy of Mistman's most recent version. And we draw Sunken Citadel off the top, so that means that we don't have to use Sylvan Scrying to find it anymore, which is pretty sweet. So we can play the Sunken Citadel here on green, have the turn 3 Titan available, and then I'm going to Sylvan Scry, and there's obviously a decent number of options that we've got here. We could get Boseiju as an out to Blood Moon, so that then we can use the Fierce Empath to just find another Titan or a Crater Hoof if we want. Which I think is what I go for here, which makes sense. Obviously, with the opponent having a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, that's another target that we can hit with the Boseiju as well. So, like going for Boseiju here, I don't really feel like anything else is standing out too much. And like I said, the nice thing about getting Boseiju is it just means that we can use Fierce Empath to just find another Titan, or like a Crater Hoof Behemoth once we get this first Titan in play, even if the opponent does have a Blood Moon here. And we've obviously got the Forest in play already, so we can use it whenever. So opponent attacks in with the Shaman token. A little bit scary that they didn't loot away 2 cards here, but they do have the Ash, which I believe they only run as a one-off here. So that's kind of unfortunate they managed to find that before our turn going into Primeval Titan. But having said that, they don't really have too many ways to actually deal with the Titan, even though it shuts us off getting the lands. I believe they've got 1 Molten Collapse as their only clean answer to it. So they now have to stop us attacking down this Ashiok with the Primeval Titan. So this is kind of the reason why I don't think Ashiok is like a complete blowout against our deck. Obviously it's very good, and that's why I'm dedicating 4 sideboard slots to get lost, but particularly in a deck like this where they don't have that many big creatures. Obviously if they jam a Shieldred here, that's going to be annoying, but we can at least try and attack down this Ashiok now. Now I'm kind of surprised they ended up minusing the Ashiok there, because it means that we need fewer damage to kill the Ashiok, right? If they just block with one of these creatures, then the Ashiok dies here. They could have just not activated the Ashiok, because obviously milling over Field of the Deads would be good for them, but if they hadn't done that, they could have just chump blocked with one of the 2/2 tokens and not worried about the Ashiok dying. It would have survived another turn there. So not 100% sure about that. I mean, obviously I don't know what's in their hand, so it's hard to say if I do agree with that play or not, but I was kind of happy for them to do that. I mean, maybe they just didn't plan on blocking with the Shaman token anyway, but regardless, we now don't have to worry about the Ashiok anymore. We can now use the Fierce Empath. I'm just trying to calculate how much mana I've got in this turn. Obviously, we could go for Generous End, and we don't have to worry about another Ashiok here, because that's the only one they're running in the main deck. So there's not really a huge rush to cast this Fierce Empath. We don't have to worry about another Ashiok until after sideboard. So just debating whether to go for Fierce Empath here or just jam a Generous End instead. And I think I prefer going for the Generous End here, because it just gets another big creature in play. Like I said, they only have 1 Molten Collapse in their main deck as an answer to the Primeval Titan, so I'm pretty sure I'm getting in with an attack with this Primeval Titan, and I much prefer just being more efficient with my mana, right? Next turn, we have, we can activate the Castle Garenbrig with only 4 lands, gives us 6 mana, and then we don't have quite enough to go for Empath and another Titan in the same turn, but I prefer just being more mana efficient and just applying pressure here, right? I want to give the opponent less time to draw out of this situation, less time to find something like a 1 ring, for example. So now I'm not too worried about Blood Moon, because we're definitely going to get some Field of Dead triggers off this Primeval Titan attack. So I'm going to play the Besaidu out here, just so that we don't have to, you know, get another land type in play before fetching the Field of the Deads. So just double checking how many lands I've got. So we can definitely get one Field of the Dead and another land here. So we could potentially get Bajuka Bog to cut the opponent off Deathrite Shaman activations, but with a completely empty hand, I don't really think that's too important here. So I think I'm just trying to weigh up here whether it's better to go for a fetch land, a Colony Garden, potentially a... I think those are the two options that I'm really weighing up, whether I go for a fetch land or not. And I think that makes sense to go for a fetch land here. Just gives us another way to get more Field of the Dead tokens into play next turn, especially after we attack, you know, get another trigger. And then obviously we have access to Fierce Empath to fetch another Titan, or potentially a Crater Hoof Behemoth next turn, because they don't really have good blocks here. You know, they're going to have to chump here, and then if we just go Fierce Empath into Crater Hoof, that's almost certainly going to be good enough to win the game unless they draw something like a Blood Moon. So they make a copy of the Deathrite Shaman as just a chump blocker and deal us a little bit of damage. And then just trying to calculate how much mana I've got here. So we can go for a Fierce Empath, and we don't have quite enough to go for Primeval Titan here. So I think I remember making a mistake here. I think I miscount my mana and go for Primeval Titan and think that I can cast it here when I'm actually 1 mana short. So what I should have done there is just go for a Crater Hoof instead, just to go for guaranteed lethal next turn. So slight misplay there, but you know, thankfully we were so far ahead here that it didn't really end up mattering. Right, we should still just be able to attack for lethal next turn anyway, I believe. But yeah, that was definitely a slight misplay. I should have got Crater Hoof there. Just counted my lands poorly. By the way, I'm pretty sure we got this one locked out, right? The only way they can get out of this is just chaining together multiple One Rings off the top, which they'd have to get pretty lucky to hit. And even still, you know, we're just going to keep building up a bigger and bigger board by attacking with the Primeval Titan, even if they have protection from the One Ring. And they trip a land off the top, which is obviously great to see for our point of view. So post-sideboard, I do think the matchup does get a bit more tricky because they do have an extra Blood Moon, an extra Ashiok, and a Necromancer as well, which is obviously good against us. So against Blood Moon decks, I typically want to bring in Haywire Might, but since the opponent is going to be having, you know, boarding up to 2 Ashioks, I think Get Lost is probably the slightly better option in this matchup. Obviously because it hits both cards, right? And I think hitting Ashiok with Get Lost is very important here. I'm just trying to calculate the numbers, whether it's worth boarding in some Haywire Might or just going in the full 4 copies of Get Lost. And I think I prefer going for the full 4 copies of Get Lost. Get Lost as an answer to Blood Moon is a little bit awkward because it does incentivize you to fetch a Temple Garden over a basic, which means that you're, you know, often left in awkward spots where you constantly have to hold open 2 mana to answer a Blood Moon if the opponent plays it. But I think I like going for the full 4 copies of Get Lost here because you really want it as an answer to Ashiok. So here I am considering only bringing in 2 because they only have 2 copies of Ashiok, but you know I think, yeah, it does look like I end up going for the full 4 copies here, which I think I like. And I'm just debating whether I want to have Sylvan Scrying here or Once Upon a Time. I think I prefer Sylvan Scrying against the Blood Moon deck because Once Upon a Time does help us find cards like Stormcast Vanguard and Besaidu, but Sylvan Scrying is much more consistent at doing so. Having said that, I can see also an argument for going for Once Upon a Time because Ashiok specifically does shut down the tutor ability of Sylvan Scrying, but you know, with only 2 copies of Ashiok, I still think I prefer relying on Sylvan Scrying. So I'm happy with how I sideboarded here. Now I'm just going to edit to the start of the next game. Okay, so going into game 2 here, as I said, the main cards I need to be wary of are Blood Moon, which I think they're moving up to 3 copies of, Ashiok, which I'll have 2 copies of, and then Necromancer, there's not really much we can do about that, but you know, I still think Necromancer isn't too good against us. If they hit Primeval Titan, we can still win with our other big creatures and Field of the Dead, and if they hit Field of the Dead, we can still just beat them down with Primeval Titans, Titan of Industries, and Crater Hoof Behemoth. So I don't actually think that Necromancer is that effective against us, so the main cards I'm going to be wary of here are Ashiok and Blood Moon. Now, thankfully, you know, one start that I was very worried about is them potentially going Dark Ritual into Ashiok on turn 1 because they are running 4 Dark Rituals. They could also use Dark Ritual to accelerate into One Ring and Shieldred, which is also potentially scary. Shieldred slightly less so because, you know, we've got Arboreal Grazer as a chump blocker. We're not too worried about the damage, but the sheer advantage they can get off the One Ring to help them find cards like Blood Moon and Ashiok in multiples is kind of scary. So having said that, we do have a pretty good start here. You know, we don't have a turn 3 Titan, but we do have a turn 4 Titan off these Castle Garenbrigs. And again, I don't want to mulligan too aggressively against the Thoughtseize deck, especially when we already have a basic here. So I draw Get Lost off the top, which is interesting. So I was thinking about using this Generous Scent to find another basic so that Natural Order is an out to Blood Moon. But now that we've drawn the Get Lost, I think I like cycling this Generous Scent now to find a Temple Garden. And then the nice thing about that is we just have this Get Lost available, you know, in case they play Blood Moon, in case they play an Ashiok, to just deal with it immediately, which is pretty huge. And then the nice thing about how our hand's set up here is, you know, as I mentioned, the awkward thing about Get Lost as an answer to Blood Moon is very risky to ever tap out if you have to search a Temple Garden, especially if you don't have a basic in play. But our hand is set up so that we're not really going to be tapping out until we have our 5th land in play. And if we tap out when we have our 5th land in play with a Titan, we immediately get Field of Dead online, so we're going to get some tokens immediately. So even if we do that, and then the opponent taps out for a Blood Moon, we'll have already got, you know, a Field of Dead online, and we can also use the Primeval Titan to tutor for another basic as well. So at that point, the Blood Moon isn't even that effective against us. So, and this sort of, you know, play pattern or setup with Get Lost does make me think that it could potentially be reasonable to just use Get Lost as my main answer to Blood Moon. As I said, it is a bit awkward if you have to forego getting a basic in order to get a Temple Garden for Get Lost, which does make, you know, ever tapping out when the opponent could resolve a Blood Moon more risky. And they do have the Blood Moon here, so obviously we want to preemptively tap our land so that we can Get Lost it straight away. But yeah, the risk with Get Lost is that, say we had a hand where we had a Fierce Empath here instead of a Titan, for example, then it would be risky because we would want to tap out for the Fierce Empath to tutor the Titan here, which would then mean that we don't have access to Get Lost, and then if the opponent does resolve the Blood Moon, then we're in trouble. Whereas if that Get Lost was a Boseiju or a Haywire Might instead, just having this single basic in play, which we would have had instead of the Temple Garden, is less risky, if that makes sense. So here the opponent attacks in. We're definitely going to be blocking the Bowmasters as opposed to the Orc token, just in case they have a second Bowmasters, right, which would then lose us the Grazer here, which would make Natural Order much less of a good top deck. And so the opponent taps out for the One Ring, which, you know, obviously it would be better if they didn't have the One Ring, but I'm very happy not to see Ashiok or another Blood Moon here. So this allows us to just get Primeval Titan online here. I think I like channeling the Kami here. You could obviously hold it to accelerate a little bit more, but I just like, you know, keeping the lands flowing here, right? We want to keep hitting our land drops so that we can keep triggering Field of Dead over and over again. And so here, you know, we've obviously got Field of Dead in play already, so I think we're just going to fetch two different lands. We could go for a Westvale Abbey, which I like, just as an alternate threat. And then I think the extra one that we're thinking of here is between either a Sunken Citadel to ramp, a fetch land to get another trigger, a Colony Garden to get a token, or a Gate to Manaborn to potentially seek another card. And I do like Gate to Manaborn here because, you know, we're kind of out of gas in hand already. Stormcloud Vanguard is obviously a great answer to Blood Moon and just a good creature to cast after that. But, you know, I think we are pretty much out of gas already, so we do want to have another way to just keep the cards flowing if we can. So opponent starts drawing more off the One Ring here, but I really like our position, right? If we can get in with another attack with Primeval Titan, that's going to be really, really difficult for them to beat, especially because then we have access to Westvale Abbey, which their deck basically has no answer for, right? Just going to check if they have a Shieldred Edict anywhere in this 75. No, it doesn't look like they do. So they have basically no way to answer Westvale Abbey if we end up flipping it, which is pretty huge here. So I'm very confident about this spot. I think they would need a very good turn here to start turning this game around. So they crack the fetch. The other nice thing is, you know, I think one of the cards that would be very good against us here is Blood Moon, but we already have this Stormcloud Vanguard as an immediate answer. So I'm feeling pretty confident about this spot. Again, we have more lands to just keep triggering this Field of Dead over and over again. They don't have too many answers to the Primeval Titan itself, but them leading with Dark Ritual is scary, so this gives them obviously, you know, access to a ton of mana here. So they then get an Ashiok in play, which is kind of scary because that then shuts off Primeval Titan, you know, making more Field of Dead tokens, which is the main way I'm thinking of just completely putting this game out of reach. Okay, they do have Molten Collapse, so that is a clean answer to the Primeval Titan. How many copies of that do they have? Okay, so they have 2 copies of Molten Collapse in the 75. One in main, one in the side deck. So that is kind of rough because now we don't really have a good way to attack down the Ashiok here. And so we draw a Sylvan Scrying off the top, which obviously isn't ideal. And I think I make a couple of misplays this game. So I think my goal here should probably just be to get Westvale Abbey online as soon as possible here. The opponent just passed with 2 mana open, so that's a pretty, clear sign. I mean, it's kind of hard to say in retrospect because I know what happens in these games, but I think, looking back at it, it's a pretty obvious sign they have another Orcish Bowmasters here. So I actually think it's a misplay for me to attack here, because I think my way of just ensuring I win this game is by getting Westvale Abbey online, because then we can transform Westvale Abbey, immediately attack the Ashiok to kill it straight away, and then they have no way to kill it. And attacking in here loses me 2 tokens, which takes me so much further away from being able to use the Westvale Abbey. I think I also forget in the moment that Westvale Abbey can activate to produce more tokens, right? Because we already had 5 tokens in... four creatures in play. All we have to do there is not attack, then play another land next turn, use the Westvale Abbey to activate, and then we have more than enough tokens in play to activate the Westvale Abbey. I also think it's probably a misplay. I mean, at this point, after attacking, it's probably correct to activate the Gates of Manaborn, but I think that turn there was a big misplay on my part. I should have just ignored the Ashiok for this turn, left my creatures back, transform the Westvale Abbey, and then I basically think there's no way they can win from that point, right? They just have no way to race the Westvale Abbey at all. Obviously, they can go shielded +1 ring, which can gain them a ton of life, but their only interaction, I believe, is destruction-based removal, like Molten Collapse, which just doesn't work against the Westvale Abbey. So yeah, that was a pretty big mistake on my part, and now they're just going to start pulling ahead with the 1 ring. So yeah, I definitely made this game a lot more difficult than it needed to be. So they have the Thoughtseize here. We could have obviously also played the Stormcurled Vanguard last turn as well after the attack, just to get another creature in play, but I'm holding on to that as an answer to Blood Moon, right? With them drawing a bunch of cards off the 1 ring, and presumably them having 3 copies of Blood Moon in post sideboard, I did want to hold this as an answer to Blood Moon, because I feel like if they do draw Blood Moon off the top and play it, we just don't have a good way to answer it. Unfortunately, they do Thoughtseize away the Stormcurled Vanguard here, so... Now the opponent has turned the game around now. A turn or two ago, I really thought I had this game locked up. And to be honest, I kind of did if I don't attack there, I think, right? Because then the opponent is incentivized to use removal to cut us off the Westvale Abbey. But if I, remember that the Westvale Abbey can create tokens and make an extra token instead, we would have 6 tokens going into our next turn. So the opponent would need to use 2 pieces of spot removal to cut us off the Westvale Abbey here. So I definitely made this game a lot more difficult than it needed to be, I think. Either way, we still have access to the Blast Zone to activate, and the opponent does minus. I guess they're trying to exile Field of the Dead from our deck. But we do get to activate the Blast Zone, tick it up to 2 to be able to potentially kill this Bowmasters at instant speed, which is useful to have access to, but... And then we draw a Natural Order off the top, which is another card that the Ashiok can't deal with. So yeah, if I hadn't attacked with last turn, then I think I'd probably just... start closing the game out really quickly this turn, because we can just cleanly attack the Ashiok. Again, I attack in, and again, this isn't... They could very well have another Bowmasters. They have a Sokenzan instead, so... Again, maybe it was better for us to not attack there again, because it takes us even further away from being able to activate the Westvale Abbey. So again, that could have been a misplay, but I think I'm just going to be jamming the Primeval Titan this turn anyway. So obviously we don't get any lands in play, but a 6/6 trample can potentially take out the Ashiok. But at this point, the opponent's drawn an extra, 6-7 cards off this 1 ring, probably even more since I attacked, which just gives them more outs to this situation, right? Helps them find the extra Molten Collapse that they'd need to take out the Primeval Titan, or potentially helps them find Shielded, which would be a big issue for us. So they lead on cracking the map token on the Bowmasters. So my read on this is that the opponent is worried about their life total. They don't want to activate the 1 ring unnecessarily, because they're already down to 10 here, and we have a 6/6 trample in place. So I'm happy to just crack the Blast Zone now, just to deny them any value that they get off the Orcish Bowmasters, and kind of force them to activate the 1 ring here if they do need to dig for something. So this kind of reads to me that they don't have a good answer to Primeval Titan yet, and they need to activate the 1 ring in order to find it. Because otherwise I feel like they would just, if they had a second 1 ring, they would just activate the 1 ring, play the second one. I guess that would enable us to just cleanly attack down the Ashiok though, so maybe not. If they had a Shielded, I'm pretty sure they would play that pre-combat and then just activate the ring straight away. Kind of surprised that they go for a shock land here, because I think the only green in their deck is a Deathrite Shaman, but they do have the Shielded now, which kind of makes sense, so now they can obviously preemptively activate the one ring in their upkeep to gain a bunch of life, and they do find the Molten Collapse. So now we're in kind of a tough spot here, where they've got Shielded plus the 1 ring set up. They've got an Ashiok in play, which shuts off both the Sylvan Scrying and the Natural Order. I mean, we still have Field of Dead online here, so I think our route to victory here is getting Westvale Abbey online. So we can play the Sunken Citadel, get another Field of Dead token. So yeah, again, I think those, the two different attacks that I made into the Ashiok were both mistakes. I think, as I said, looking back on this game, Westvale Abbey is the way that I win here. They don't have any real answers to it at all. So, I mean, we're still not too far away from getting Westvale Abbey online, right? Because if we activate the Westvale Abbey this turn and then just play a Castle Gambrig, that's 5 creatures, then we can activate to flip it next turn. But the opponent can safely activate the One Ring here. They know we don't have any instant speed. Actually, no, we could have Get Lost, I guess. So the opponent maybe is worried that we do have a Get Lost in hand and can answer Shielded at instant speed, which would kill them off the One Ring if they don't have another one. But we would have had to draw it as the single unknown card in our hand, if that makes sense. And we would have also probably used the Get Lost to kill the Ashiok before this point, which then enables the Natural Order. So, but I mean, having said that, I think in this moment my game plan is still: don't block if they attack with the Shieldred, activate the Westvale Abbey to get an extra token in play the Castle Gambrig to get another token, and then activate the Westvale Abbey to then just start attacking in the air with the indestructible creature, which they don't have any way to deal with, like I said. I mean, having said that, if we do let the attack through, we take 4 damage off the Shieldred and then an extra 2 off the draw trigger, but we would immediately be gaining 9 life back off the Westvale Abbey attack as well. Kind of worried that my opponent is now mousing over the Westvale Abbey, and I'm pretty certain that they, with so many cards in hand, they must have a bunch of removal available. So they, it would be pretty easy for them to cut us off the Westvale Abbey activation. All they need to do at this point is, kill one of our creatures. But they do have the Blood Moon here, so now they can just completely shut off the Westvale Abbey. So now we're in trouble, and as I said, I definitely made this game so much harder than I needed to be, but I got completely bailed out off the top with this Crater Hoof top deck, which was super lucky. So I do think that the deck should have won this game. I just played pretty poorly, not realizing early enough that Westvale Abbey is the way to win, but we obviously got bailed out straight away there with another good top deck. Having said that, I do think if it went to a game 3, especially on the play, we would have had the advantage, but ended up getting bailed out from our misplays with that top deck there. And I did apologise to the opponent afterwards for this top deck. That was obviously very rough for them. But either way, moving up to 5-1, which is a winning in for the final round of Swiss. Okay, so now we're moving into the final round of Swiss, where if I win this one, I'm guaranteed to top 8. If I don't win this one, then I think there's still a chance that I can top 8, but I would need very good breakers. And so final round, we're against Rakdos Burn, which I think, overall I felt is a favourable matchup for this deck, but, it's definitely not an auto win, and they do have some very scary starts. So we are on the play, which is a very, very big deal in this matchup, and we do have Sunken Citadel plus Castle Gambrig plus the Generous Scent to find us a Forest and Fierce Empath, so I'm pretty sure I keep this one. I'd be very surprised if I don't. I think I'm just trying to figure out how I sequence this hand. So obviously we have all tap lands, so we're going to have to lead on a tap land, and I think leading on the Sunken Citadel makes a lot of sense because we're going to be cycling away, or very likely cycling away, this Generous Scent to find a basic, which we can then use to cast the Grazer and then put a Castle Gambrig in play. So opponent leading on a Bump in the Night and not a creature is a very good sign. I don't know if that means they don't have a creature. I presume it must do. Maybe they've just got a hand full of burn. But either way, we get the Grazer down, which is really big, because if they do then have like an Eidolon of the Great Reveler, or they draw like a Swift Spear or Soul Scum Mage off the top, we can just block to start soaking up damage straight away, which is a very big deal. And now we have Natural Order as well off the top, which is huge. So if they don't kill the Grazer here, we can just Natural Order immediately for either a Primeval Titan or potentially a Titan of Industry. I could see an argument going for Titan of Industry just because that 5 life is going to make a huge difference, and I don't think there's really any way they can attack past the creatures, but I think it just depends on how the turn goes here. So the opponent goes for Bump in the Night again, so we are losing a lot of life here, right? I assume they must have just a handful of burn spells rather than creatures, because I think burn, especially against a deck like ours where we just have no creature removal, they would almost assuredly just play their creatures out early on. Now I think they could still potentially have an Eidolon of the Great Revel here, because they do end up using Skewer the Critics on the Grazer, so they do cut us off Natural Order here, and in order to do that they would need to Bump in the Night phase, so I still think there's a chance they have an Eidolon here, but either way I go Fierce Empath, and I do grab the Primeval Titan here, which, We could, again, have gone for the Titan of Industry, but with a Natural Order in hand, I think I like going for the Primeval Titan here, because then we can grab both Radiant Fountain and Westvale Abbey, which are two, or potentially Colony Garden as well, which is like huge ways to pull ahead on terms of life, which is the most important thing in this matchup, especially when the opponent's already used 2 copies of Bump in the night to go face. So I'm still pretty confident about my spot here. Like, again, I am definitely constantly concerned about my life total against burn. So I am going to always prioritize buffering my life total, which again means that I think there's a reasonable chance that if the Fierce Empath doesn't die here, we just go for Natural Order for Titan of Industry. So they do Bolt Face, and they do have the Eidolon here. And again, we could go for Primeval Titan, which I think is probably the more generically powerful play, but I could also just see an argument for going for Natural Order into Titan of Industry, just to immediately gain that 5 life and just ensure we don't get burnt out, which is looks like what I go for here. So I think this is definitely the more disciplined play, and I'm kind of glad I went for this, because if their hand was like double Lightning Bolt and they draw another bolt off the top, we are just dead. Whereas this just ensures that doesn't happen, and we get 2 huge creatures in play that they just don't have any ways to kill in their main deck. We then have Primeval Titan as a follow-up play that we can do to get Radiant Fountain and Westvale Abbey or Colony Garden at this point. So they attack. I think, there's no real risk of blocking with the 7/7 here, whereas they could obviously use burn spells to take out the 4/4, but I assume... Actually, I'm not even sure why they did that, to be honest. Maybe they don't want to take damage off their own spells, which I guess makes sense. Yeah, if they have Bowmasters in to skewer the critics, they don't want to have to take 4 damage off their own Orcish Bowmasters when we have a 7/7 Trampler in play. So now we follow up the Primeval Titan. Absolutely going to get the Radiant Fountain here, regardless. And then I think it's between Westvale Abbey and Colony Garden. I like going for Westvale Abbey here. I feel like we've already got enough creatures in play, really. And then I think I'm playing super carefully here, because this is my game to lose, and I've lost many times against burn, them just top decking burn spells. So I like only attacking with the 7/7 here, even though it does potentially buy the opponent another turn. It does mean that we don't have to worry about them just attacking us, or, taking out the 4/4 and then attacking us. Maybe it was too disciplined there not to attack with the 4/4. Maybe I'm supposed to get in there, but regardless, opponent scoops it up. Now, post-sideboard, I don't really think they have too much. They've got Unholy Heat, Roiling Vortex, Tormod's Crypt, and Searing Blood. So they don't have Blood Moon. They don't have... I don't even know what other cards burn could have that would be good against us in this matchup, to be fair. I mean, Roiling Vortex is something that I'm concerned about, but I still don't really think we need the Vanguard. I do like bringing in the Haywire Might here, because it does take out the Roiling Vortex and also gains us a bit of life back as well, which is pretty big. So I believe that's probably the only swap I make here. So I'm just going to edit out until the start of the next game. So going into game 2 here, obviously being on the draw is definitely a concern, because, basically all of our incidental life gain we do have to accelerate into. So I am a little bit concerned about that, but I do feel like we've got really good tools for this matchup. Natural Order into Titan of Industry, as we saw last game, is so good at stabilizing. Primeval Titan being able to grab Westvale Abbey is huge in this matchup, as is Radiant Fountain as well. And the opponent mulls... I believe they're already on a mull to 5, which is really, really rough for a burn deck to have to do, right? Typically burn, the quality of their cards is pretty even throughout, so having to mulligan at all, it is very rough. So obviously from our side, that's very good to see. So we did on Once Upon a Time here. We've got Acceleration. We've got Sylvan Scrying to help us find Castle Garenbrig. So again, we don't really have that fast a Titan here, right? We have the Grazer, we can shoot to the Garenbrig. I think I'm just debating here whether I need an extra land or whether I can get away with grabbing an extra accelerant. With this Sylvan Scrying here, we do have access to 4 lands, but, if we don't draw a land off the top, then we don't really have that fast acceleration here. So I think I like, looking back on this, I do like getting an extra land here, because if we got another Kami, for example, and we don't draw land off the top, then it is a blocker, but it doesn't really do much else outside of that, to be honest. But either way, even though we don't have that fast a Titan here, the opponent mulling to 5 is obviously huge for us. And again, we still have a turn 4 Primeval Titan here because of the acceleration off the Grazer, right? We can Sylvan Scrying for Castle Garenbrig, and then... not this turn, but the following turn, we can just jam a Titan, get Radiant Fountain down, and with the opponent having fewer resources because of the mulligan, this game is going to be a lot easier than it would have been otherwise. Having said that, the opponent does have Bowmasters to take out the plant token here. which does shut us off a potential natural order top deck, which would have been very big going into this turn 3 here. But again, because the opponent had to mull to 5, I still feel in a pretty good position. Having said that, you know, they do have a DRC in play now. If they can trigger Delirium quickly, and we do just keep drawing these Field of the Dead, so we're not drawing particularly well off the top here either. I still like the play of going for Windswept Heath here, though, because we want to get Primeval Titan getting the Field of Dead online as early as possible. We don't really want to be putting 2 lands of the same name in play this early if we can avoid it. But regardless, we still get to play Primeval Titan this coming turn, which is going to be pretty big. So even if the opponent had kept a 7, we'd probably be at slightly lower life total now, but I still think we've got a reasonable chance of stabilising with this turn 4 Titan. And, you know, obviously if we'd drawn a non-land instead of one of these Field of the Deads, we'd be in a much better position ourselves as well. So we go down to 13 off this shock. Obviously, not going to put a shock land into play here because preserving our life total is really important. And then we go Castle Garenbrig into Titan. And then because we had to wait until our 5th land, we do immediately get Field of Dead online, which is very big. So here, I definitely like getting a Radiant Fountain. And then the other card I'm thinking is probably either Westfell Abbey or maybe a Bojuka Bog here, just to cut the opponent off Delirium. Blast Zone is also an interesting one as well, which is, I think, what I go for here. I'm not sure whether I prefer that over Bojuka Bog in hindsight, because I think keeping this DRC off having Delirium is pretty important. I also think Westfell Abbey would have been a good pickup here as well, so I'm not sure I really agree with the Blast Zone pick here. I think both Bojuka Bog and Westfell Abbey probably would have been better picks, but I mean, it's still fine in this spot, right? We're still going to get a bunch of Field of the Dead tokens. I still think we're in a solid position, but yeah, I think Blast Zone is probably the weakest of the cards I could have got there. Actually, maybe Blast Zone is better than Bojuka Bog because it cleanly answers the DRC, so we don't have to worry about Delirium anyway. But looking back on it, I think I would have preferred getting a Westfell Abbey here, especially because if they do get Delirium with the channel, they're forced to attack, so they would be forced to attack into my the Ormondals. So yeah, I definitely think I should have got the Westfell Abbey there instead of the Blast Zone, but thankfully, because the opponent was on a mull to 5 and they didn't have as many resources, which is very relevant against a burn deck, we can just attack in here. Yeah, opponent just scoops it up. So managed to get the top 8 there, which is pretty huge. Okay, so going into the top 8 here, we're against Elliot Dragon, who's a really great player and deck builder, also a streamer, and he's brought the sweetest and spiciest deck to this tournament. It's Mono Black Necropotence Devotion with Karn and Grey Merchant of Asphodel and 2 lots of Ashiok. And this matchup looked like a nightmare to me. I've never faced this deck before, but I'll leave a link to both his Twitter and the deck list in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. But yeah, I'm worried about this matchup. Again, I've not played it before, so I'm not 100% sure how bad it is, but he's got, you know, 4 Dark Ritual, 4 Necropotence, 4 main deck Ashiok Dream Render, which is obviously one of the best cards against our deck, so being on the play in this match is huge. I was the slightly higher seed going into the top 8 because I was 3rd, so I do get to pick being on the play here, which is obviously going to be very relevant. And this hand looks pretty good to me. I think my game plan here is just to race as fast as possible and hope that Elliot doesn't have a very fast start. So he's having to mulligan a lot here, which is obviously also very fortunate for us. So I think they're on a mull to 4 at the moment, which is, I mean, obviously, you know, being on the play, having a reasonably fast hand here and then mulling to 4 is very, very fortunate for us. Having said that, I do think that their deck can probably afford to mulligan a little bit more aggressively, because if they do have, you know, turn 1 Dark Ritual into Necropotence, they can just completely refuel their hand very easily. And additionally, if they can go turn 1 Dark Ritual into Ashiok, that makes things very, very difficult for us and slows us down a lot, which will probably be able to buy them time to find the Necropotence to be able to just refuel their hands. But either way, you know, my role in this matchup is to just race as fast as possible. Turn 1 on the Once Upon a Time, I'm absolutely looking for an accelerant here because we really want to get this turn 3 Titan out, which is our main way of winning here. So thankfully we do have the Sunken Citadel and the Castle Garenbrig. There is maybe an argument to getting an extra land here because we do obviously need the 4th land for this natural order, but I mean, absolute worst case scenario, we can just empath for a generous cent to find it anyway. But like I said, I don't think we can afford to play too cautiously here, right? We just need to come out the gates guns blazing and try and close this game out before they can get their engines online. So thankfully we do draw the 4th land. We don't need to use this Fierce Empath to find a Generous End, which is really big because that means that we can now hardcast the Primeval Titan here and then save this Natural Order for a Crater Hoof just to, really go as fast as possible and just close out the game as quickly as we can, which probably will end up with a turn 4 win here, which is pretty unusual for this deck, I'm not going to lie. So we go Field of the Dead here, and then I think, looking back on it, I would go for Colony Garden here. We really want an extra creature in play to be able to buff the Crater Hoof next turn. I ended up going for Westphal Abbey, which I don't think I like here. I should have gone for the Colony Garden because we should just be going for the Crater Hoof next turn. So that was a misplay on my part. I definitely should have gone for the Colony Garden there instead. I mean, thankfully... Okay, they do have the turn 3 Necropotence. I was going to say, thankfully they didn't have a crazy fast start. They could have obviously mulled down low and gone Ritual into Necro and just refueled, but thankfully for us, they didn't find the Ritual here. Regardless, since they do deal themselves quite a lot of damage off the Necropotence, we can just go for the Natural Order into Crater Hoof for the win next turn anyway. But yeah, I definitely should have gone for the Colony Garden here because that would basically guarantee a win off the Crater Hoof next turn, whereas... Not getting the Colony Garden means that we, probably rely on them dealing a little bit of damage to themselves off this Necropotence in order to go for lethal. Thankfully, they don't have access to a single black mana, because if they did, they could have potentially gone for March of Wretched Sorrow, exiling a bunch of cards to gain them a bunch of life. Take out the Primeval Titan so that we can't get Field of the Dead online. So here, I think we want to lead on Once Upon a Time to try and find another land that isn't Field of the Dead to just put a token into play to buff our board slightly further with the Crater Hoof. So we find a Gate to Mana-Born, which is perfect. Now we can Natural Order the Grazer, go for Crater Hoof, and steal game 1, which I think is very, very important because this matchup, as I said, not played it before, but it does look very tricky from the Titan side. So yeah, managed to steal game 1 there. So post-sideboard, this is definitely a matchup for the 4 copies of Get Lost because we really want to be... Ashiok Dream Render is their main way of slowing us down here. So we really want to have as many answers to that as possible. And then the question here is whether we want to cut Once Upon a Time or Sylvan Scrying. I think I do like cutting the Sylvan Scrying here because of Ashiok specifically. They're not a Blood Moon deck, so we don't need to use Sylvan Scrying to find the Boseiju. And so I think I prefer keeping Once Upon a Time in here and cutting the Sylvan Scryings. Now, having said that, I do trim the Stormkeld Vanguard for 1 Sylvan Scrying here, which I don't think I really like. I think Stormkeld Vanguard being able to take out stuff like Necropotence, and then I'll have another look at their deck list and see what else they're running in the sideboard against us. But yeah, I mean, they're also running Khan the Great Creator and a bunch of artifacts in the sideboard, and Stormkeld Vanguard being able to take out anything they could grab off the Con sideboard seems pretty relevant here. So either way, I think this is how I sideboard. I'm not 100% sure I agree with it. I think I would have preferred to keep the Stormkeld Vanguard in over the Sylvan Scrying, but this is how I sideboard, so let's just skip straight to the gameplay. Okay, so going into game 2 here, again, it's tricky for me because I'm not sure the best way to approach this matchup. This is definitely the advantage of running an unknown deck, right? I don't have good experience playing against this deck. I don't know what I should be mulliganing for. I don't know what sort of hands I should be keeping here, really. So this hand, again, I think I should just be trying to race here, and I do like this hand if we can find a Castle Garenbrig, right? So we're putting a lot of pressure on this Once Upon a Time here, but with Turn 1 Accelerant and Once Upon a Time potentially finding Castle Garenbrig, I do think this hand, it's risky, but I think it's worth keeping, because especially on the draw, we do need to accelerate here. Unfortunately, we don't find the Garenbrig here, which is kind of annoying, and this is kind of a situation where having access to Sylvan Scrying instead of Once Upon a Time would make this hand a lot better. So, again, maybe it's confirmation bias. Maybe, I don't know. I do think Once Upon a Time is probably better than Sylvan Scrying in this matchup because of the 4 Ashioks. But, as I've said, if this Once Upon a Time was a Sylvan Scrying, we could go turn 1 Grazer, turn 2 Sylvan Scrying to find the Castle Garenbrig, turn 3 Titan. So instead, I think we're picking here between whether we want to go for another Accelerant or another land. I end up going for another land here, which I think, again, I like, because if we do go for another Grazer or another Accelerant in general, and we've only got... what was that? We would only have 4 lands in hand. We would need to draw another land for the acceleration to be... to actually do anything. Having said that, we've probably got a hand here where we need to get lucky anyway, right? So I think taking Westphal Abbey or Forest was probably the more disciplined play, but in this situation, I think since we don't have the Castle Garenbrig and we're not going to be casting Titan until we have 6 lands with this hand, it probably would have been slightly better, or it would have given us a better chance to win, getting another Grazer here and just hoping to rip another land off the top, right? Because then if we rip another land off the top, all we need at that point is one more land, and then we do have a turn 4 Titan, I believe. So, I don't know. I mean, again, it's tricky to say. Obviously, Sylvan Scrying would have been better in this matchup, but I do think, in general, Sylvan Scrying is worse against this deck because they have the 4 Ashioks in. So, I mean, this is definitely a tricky game to analyse because I still don't really have much practice playing against this deck. So, Cavern of Souls off the top, not a very good draw here. We can cast the Fierce Empath, but I'm not really sure what the best card to grab is. We've already got a Primeval Titan, so I think I get a Crater Hoof here, which I think I do like this line because my way to victory here is cast the Primeval Titan in our hand, and then once we get a Titan in play, we can set up to go for Crater Hoof the following turn. So I think the correct pick here would be Crater Hoof. Since we did rip lands off the top, I think it would have been better to get a Grazer off the Once Upon a Time, and I do think, as I said a few times, it probably was correct sideboarding to cut the Sylvan Scryings for and kept the Once Upon a Times in here. So I think the only mistake I've made so far this game is not getting Grazer instead of the Westvale Abbey, and just, you know, hope to get a little bit lucky with lands off the top, because with a slightly slower hand like this where we didn't find a Garenbrig off the Once Upon a Time, I think we did need to get a bit lucky off the top in order to recover here. So they do have an Ashiok Dream Remender, which is obviously very rough. That now means that getting this Crater Hoof becomes a lot worse. And now I make a huge blunder. And this is on coverage as well. So if you want to watch this game back from Elliot's side and, you know, just get full information about what's going on from both sides of the game, then I'll leave a link down to the VOD in the description if you want to check it out. But yeah, casting a Windswept Heath when the opponent has an Ashiok in play is obviously a huge mistake on my part, because we can't crack fetch lands under Ashiok. I mean, again, I don't think it makes too much of a difference. At this point, we're super far behind, but playing that Windswept Heath just is kind of the nail in my coffin of being able to recover from this game, because now we need to get 7 lands in play to cast the Primeval Titan, because I don't think, Elliot's not going to allow me to just attack this Ashiok down with this 1/1 Fierce Empath. So yeah, very bad misplay on my part. But having said that, I still think we're pretty disadvantaged here anyway. They have a pretty stacked hand, and we're not doing anything until, even if I hadn't played the Windswept Heath, we wouldn't be casting Titan until next turn at the earliest anyway. And, they have that, which gives them a lot of time, right? I mean, having said that, delaying the Titan by an extra turn because of the Windswept Heath is an absolute disaster. There's basically no way that I can recover from this game because of that misplay, but as I said, even without playing the Windswept Heath, I think it's going to be very difficult for us, because they have all the time in the world now, and they have a lot of ways to accelerate mana, both in terms of Nykthos and in terms of Dark Ritual as well, which they can very easily find off the Necropotence. And now they go really deep off the Necro. So basically, I do make them play out this game. First of all, because I don't really fully understand what their end game looks like. And it would be interesting for me to know what their deck does going into Game 3, to know what to play around a little bit better. And additionally, they are taking a long time to think about these decisions. So I thought I'll make them play it out just in case the clock comes into things going into Game 3. But as I said, especially with the Windswept Heath misplay, there's basically no way that I win this game. So basically what happens, I'm going to edit the rest of this game out because Elliot's practically already won at this point. I think he goes Karn, Stonebrain my Primeval Titan, Stonebrain my Crater Hoof, then gets an Ashiok, the 5-mana Ashiok in play, draws a ton of cards, and then finishes me off with the Grey Merchant. Again, I'm going to leave the VOD down in the description, so if you want to watch the full game and you want to see this really cool deck from Elliot's side, then feel free to check that out. But so this video isn't ridiculously long, I'm just going to edit the rest of this game out. Okay, so going into Game 3 here, I did make a slight swap in sideboarding between Games 2 and 3, and I did cut the Sylvan Scrying for that single copy of Stormceld Vanguard, which I do like because Stormceld Vanguard being able to answer both Necropotence, even though that's not great because they usually get value off Necro straight away, but also being able to take out any artifact they grab off the Karn sideboard is pretty big. Again, being on the play here is going to be very relevant. I end up keeping this hand mainly off the back of the Kami and Get Lost here. Obviously, and we obviously also have the Sunken Citadel Castle Garenbrig. We have the Windswept Heath to grab Temple Garden. So whilst we don't have the Primeval Titan or a way to find it yet, we do have a potential turn 4 Titan of Industry if we can find another land here, because we do have Sunken Citadel, Castle Gambrig already. And the Get Lost here, I think, is going to be very big as well, because not only does this give us an answer to Ashiok Dream Render, but it also gives us a potential answer to Necropotence if we want to kill that, or as a way to fizzle their March of Otherworldly Light. So they do have Dark Ritual Necropotence on turn 1, which I'm obviously, you know, gutted to see here, because I did think I had a reasonably good start here, especially if we can find a Fierce Empath or a Titan off the top. Now, having said that, you know, Necro on its own isn't necessarily good enough to win if they don't draw exactly what they're looking for, right? Because the thing is, when you have a huge Necropotence turn, you ideally want to have a spare black mana so that you can immediately convert the excess cards you draw into March of Wretched Sorrow to be able to gain you a bunch of life back. Doing it on turn 1, and I do believe Elliot goes pretty deep here. Yeah, he draws 10 cards here, so he's going to be discarding quite a lot to hand size here. Having said that, that's a lot of cards to look for what you need to be able to, you know, have a pretty combo burst turn. And I believe, you know, looking at coverage from Elliot's side, he did kind of brick. You know, he didn't find exactly what he was looking for here, which definitely did help us a little bit. So yeah, Elliot's just thinking about what to discard to hand size here. From our point of view, you know, Get Lost, we could obviously use it to destroy Necropotence, but I feel like that's a complete waste at this point, right? They've already drawn 10 cards off it, and it is locking them out from drawing cards, so it could actually work in our favour if they don't find March of Wretched Sorrow or exactly what they're looking for. Because that's the thing, is they don't have access to an extra black mana, so they don't gain themselves a bunch of extra life. So I think, unless I can draw a Primeval Titan here, my game plan is to just kind of lock them under Necropotence if I can, right? That's basically what I was thinking at this point. I either want to draw Fierce Empath or Primeval Titan to just try and race, or since they have Necropotence and they don't have access to March and a bunch of cards in their hand, there's a chance that we could potentially lock them under the Necropotence here. So I'm basically saving Get Lost for either Ashiok Dream Render, which obviously makes Natural Order, makes Primeval Titan a lot worse, or trying to use it to fizzle their March of Wretched Sorrow if I can, because I can use Get Lost to kill my own creature, which, you know, again, would kind of trap them under Necropotence if they don't have exactly what they need in their hand at the time. So obviously, you know, what we're looking for here is Fierce Empath. We're looking for Primeval Titan off the top, would obviously be a really sick draw as well. And then outside of that, as I said, we're just holding Get Lost for Ashiok Dream Render, holding Get Lost to fizzle March, and then Titan of Industry is also a really good way to just start applying pressure as well. So Elliot obviously in the tank here about what they want to keep in their hand. Very difficult decision. I might just edit this out to save a little bit of time though. Okay, so back to my turn, and we draw Kami of Bamboo Groves, which is an interesting draw here. So this is an interesting point in the game. So first of all, I think I make a misplay playing the Castle Gambrig out here. I think my thought process was that I might be using this Kami to channel, so I want to not play the forest when I'm going to be getting more forest, but this gives the opponent information that I have Gambrig plus Sunken Citadel. Now this is a very interesting decision point here. I choose not to play the Kami out because I'm worried here that I won't draw a land off the top. If I play a Kami of Bamboo Groves here and I don't draw a land off the top for like the next 2 or 3 turns, I can't cast the Titan of Industry. Whereas if I do channel the Kami here, I'm guaranteed to cast the Titan of Industry in 2 turns. Now, I'm not 100% sure whether, you know, I do take the conservative line here of not playing the Kami and, you know, guaranteeing that, you know, I'm not at the mercy of the top of the deck. It doesn't matter if I don't draw a land off the top. But maybe in this spot, it's best to just go for the Kami and, you know, hope to rip a land off the top. I'm still not 100% sure, because if we do go for Kami here and we do draw a land off the top, we can go for Titan of Industry next turn, which is very huge, especially when they only have 2 lands in play. So I'm not 100% sure if this was the spot to play conservatively in or not, if that makes sense. So I'm still not 100% sure about this line. I took the slightly safer line, but I could definitely see an argument for just jamming the Kami here and hoping to draw land, because we are running a very land-heavy deck. You know, the chances are fairly high that we would draw an untapped land off the top. But again, this does guarantee that we're able to cast Titan in 2 turns, if that makes sense. But having said that, their deck definitely has the stronger mid to late game. So I think we're probably better off. You know, looking back on it now, I think it is super close, and I don't think the line I went for was bad, really. But I think in this matchup, you know, again, this is definitely where Elliot playing a relatively unknown deck from my point of view is a big advantage, because I don't know how important it is for me to apply pressure here. I think looking back on it, I probably should have just jammed the Kami there and hoped to rip a land off the top, just because the chance of getting Titan of Industry down next turn when they're down at 2 life here is obviously huge. So they go for an Orcish Bowmasters here. I presume at this point they're going to go face with the Bowmasters and then use March to take out the Kami. They take out the Kami here, which kind of surprises me, but then I believe they go for March targeting their own Bowmasters token, which I'm not 100% sure about why they did that, because if they'd gone face with the Bowmasters and used the March to target the Kami, even if I use Get Lost in response, they still get to keep an extra Orc token around, which would have made a big difference against Titan of Industry. But regardless, I think, my game plan here is just fizzle March, get Titan of Industry into play, and then hopefully just use that to try and close the game out, because having Trample is very big here. Even if they did have the 1/1 token, their deck doesn't have too many ways to deal with bigger creatures once they're in play. They obviously do have the March of Wretched Sorrow, but they need a lot of cards in hand to be able to take out a 7/7, and they're presumably going to use the March now while they have a bunch of excess cards in their hand to try and gain a bunch of life. So yeah, but basically my plan with Get Lost here is they didn't cast the Ashiok Dream Render, thankfully, so we want to try and lock them under Necropotence, make sure that they're left stranded with just the cards that they've got in hand. So they do try and march their Orc token here, and I do think about what I'm going to do here, because the thing with using Get Lost is it does mean that we can't channel the Kami. But if we do miss a land drop off the top, we can obviously just channel the Kami during our main phase next turn, so that's not too much of an issue. Or even during the opponent's turn, because we already do have a land here. So we do get lost, and now I feel like, okay, we've actually got a chance to win this. And we do rip a land off the top, so I kind of regret not going for the Kami now. Obviously, had things gone a different way, had I jammed the Kami last turn and then missed land drops for the next 2 turns, then I would have obviously regretted doing it the other way around. But I do think in retrospect it probably would have been better. Like, this matchup does seem very rough for the Titan list, and we do need to get quite lucky. So I think we probably would have been better off jamming Kami last turn, and then having Titan of Industry in play this turn would have been huge, because not only would we have been able to take out the Necropotence, which denies them essentially 3 mana off the Nykthos, but we would have immediately put them dead on board, right? We would have had a Kami in play, 7/7 trampled Titan of Industry, and a 4/4 as well. So yeah, I mean, again, it's tricky to say though, because it's just risk reward weighing it up, right? Whether potentially missing land drops off the top is worth waiting a turn to close the game out. They do have the Field of Ruin here, which then gets me very worried, because if they Field of Ruin the Castle Garenbrig here, that cuts us off Titan of Industry. However, from their point of view, Titan of Industry is a one-of, right? So if they have other stuff to do in their hands, especially when they don't have access to a ton of mana to start off with here, I can completely see why they didn't use the Field of Ruin here. And I was thinking maybe it was a mistake casting the Castle Garenbrig out early, but regardless of when we did it, we would have had the Garenbrig in play now. So they get an Ashiok in play, so that, from their point of view, again, is a good play, because it shuts off Natural Order, it shuts off Primeval Titan. Thankfully, we have the one-off Titan of Industry, though, which doesn't really care about Ashiok at all. And then they cast Grafdigger's Cage, which again, shuts off Natural Order even further in case we have a Get Lost to take out the Ashiok Dream Render. And so now we can just jam the Titan of Industry. Actually, thinking about it as well, had they decided to go for Field of Ruin, us waiting a turn on the Kami could have cost us this game, right? Because if we had gone Kami and ripped the Radiant Fountain off the top, not only would we have probably won the game by now, because we can use the Titan of Industry to just attack for lethal, but we also would have given them an extra turn window to use the Field of Ruin to take out the Castle Garenbrig. So I definitely misplayed a couple of times. In retrospect, I definitely think I should have just jammed the Kami. I think that was partially just due to a lack of experience in this matchup, and not quite realizing how important it is for the Titan deck to just go as fast as it can, and have to rely on the top of the deck sometimes if it means closing the game out a little bit quicker, I think. So they go down to one off the Necropotence. By the way, taking out the Necropotence here is definitely the right call, I think, because they have a Nykthos in play, right? So this just cuts them off 3 potential mana, which is very big when they're They're not locked under Necropotence anymore. They do get to draw an extra card off the top, but limiting the amount of mana they have in this spot when we have 2 lethal threats in play is very, very big. So this was a really interesting game. I definitely misplayed, partially due to a lack of experience and partially... Well, I think it's just due to a lack of experience playing against the deck, to be honest. If I played against it again, I think I probably would have gone for that Cami line a little bit earlier. But thankfully, I still think we're in a pretty good spot here. And, you know, obviously we did have to get quite lucky drawing the one-off Titan of Industry as opposed to a Primeval Titan on Natural Order that were both locked out because of Ashiok and Grafdigger's Cage. So I definitely got very lucky to win this match. Very fortunate to get this one down. Okay, so now we move on to the semi-finals and we're against Jund Midrange, which I actually think is a pretty good matchup from the Titan side from my experience. However, this particular list is running 3 copies of Blood Moon in the main deck, which is a little bit of a concern. And additionally, Nicole finished 1 spot higher than me in seeding going into top 8, so they guaranteed to get to go on the play in this match, which is obviously a disadvantage for us. Now, I hate having to mulligan against Thoughtseize decks in general, but I don't think we can keep that first one. It's just too risky. This one I think we can keep, though, and I'm just debating here whether we want to put back Titan of Industry or Sylvan Scrying. I think with the... you know, with 3 Blood Moons in the main deck, I think Sylvan Scrying is definitely the card we want more to be able to fetch a basic, especially when we have these 2 Castle Garenbrigs in hand as well. So I do take a minute to think about this, but looking back on it, I definitely think putting back the Titan of Industry makes the most sense here. The argument for maybe keeping Titan of Industry is to make your hand more resilient to Thoughtseize, right? We already have Citadel plus Castle Garenbrig, so as long as we have 2 other lands off the top, we can potentially just cast the Titan of Industry on turn 4, potentially off this Arboreal Grazer, which is pretty big. On turn 5. So they do have the Thoughtseize here, which is a bit of a concern because if they take the Grazer, we lose Acceleration. If they take the Scrying, it probably means they've got Blood Moon. And if they take the Primeval Titan, we're kind of out of gas at the top end. So regardless of what they take here, it's a little bit rough. They do take the Sylvan Scrying. So this basically says to me that they have a Blood Moon here. I don't think there's any other reason why they would take the Sylvan Scrying otherwise, and that leaves us in kind of a tough spot if they do just jam a Blood Moon here. Having said that, they don't have a basic and play themselves, but they could obviously very well just fetch a basic and then play the Blood Moons. So we're in a little bit of a rough position if they do have the Blood Moon, which I imagine they would. Natural Order is actually a really sick draw off the top, and if they don't have Blood Moon here, like if they're missing their 3rd land drop and we can find an untapped land off the top, we have access to both Natural Order and Primeval Titan, which would be huge. If we could get that off, I think that just single-handedly wins us the game straight away. However, like I said, you know, them taking the Sylvan Scrying is telegraphing pretty hard. Either that they have Blood Moon or potentially a Jarsil as well, because that's a card they're running, right? They could cast a Jarsil and then Thoughtseize away the Primeval Titan. So not 100% sure they do have Blood Moon because it could also be a Jarsil, and I would prefer them to have Jarsil, obviously, now that we've drawn Natural Order off the top. But they do have the Blood Moon here, but on the flip side, they don't have any basics themselves, so they're kind of locked under Blood Moon a little bit as well. Now, I definitely want to prioritise putting the Castle Garenbrig in play, because putting the Sunken Citadel in play under Blood Moon means that if Blood Moon is later removed, it won't produce any mana, because you didn't name a colour when it enters the battlefield. But this game now just kind of comes down to whether I can draw a Generosent or a basic before they can kill me, basically. They put the Gigantha in hand, so as long as they have the 5th land, they can put the Gigantha in play, which not only is a 4-turn clock on its own, but it can also help them produce mana of any colour as well, because they can tap the Gigantha for mana. So I'm debating here whether I want to put the Sunken Citadel in play. I think I end up going for it, but I don't really think there's too much I could have done this game, right? I think we had to mulligan that first hand, and then the second hand was a decent keep, right? You know, you don't want to mulligan much against a Thoughtseize deck, and we did have Sylvan Scrying to fetch a basic as well. So if they didn't have Thoughtseize into Blood Moon, we did have a way to get a basic and potentially keep playing through this game. And then they had a follow-up Blood Moon. So we're in real trouble here. We're basically just trying to find a basic off the top. You know, if we can go basic into basic, Primeval Titan, or, you know, get Natural Order off, getting a Titan of Industry, we're in a good spot. But, you know, double Blood Moon. I think just Thoughtseize away our out to Blood Moon, into Blood Moon, and then not drawing any basics just kind of shut the door on this game. So unfortunately, you know, we end up getting mooned out game 1, which is a bit annoying. Because I do feel like we had, you know, if they didn't have the Thoughtseize to take away the Sylvan Scrying, I probably almost certainly would have got a basic off the Sylvan Scrying, and then we would have at least had somewhat of a game there. So post-sideboard here, they're not running Ashiok at all, I don't believe. Let me just have a quick look at the list. Yeah, no Ashiok in the 75, so Haywire Might is a better out to Blood Moon than Get Lost, because you don't need white mana, which means you can prioritise fetching basics as opposed to Temple Garden, which is pretty big. And then I'm debating what to cut to make room for the Haywire Mites. I think I prefer cutting Once Upon a Time because Sylvan Scrying is very important, not only at finding basics like we were trying to do that last game, but also at trying to find Boseiju as well, which is pretty big. So I like how I sideboarded here. You know, I want to keep Sylvan Scrying in, I want to keep Stormcell, Vanguard and Titan of Industry in, especially as outs to Blood Moon, and I do like bringing in the extra Haywire Mites. So just going to edit out the rest of sideboarding and get straight into game 2. Okay, so going into game 2 here, the main cards that I'm wary of from their sideboard is the extra copy of Blood Moon, so they can go up to 4 copies of Blood Moon post sideboard. And they've also got 2 copies of Slaughter Games, which I'm not sure if they brought in against me. I'd have to go back and watch the VOD again. I'll leave that in the description if you want to check it out. But this hand, I think, is pretty good. I mean, my main concern here is that we don't have any untapped lands. I mean, if we play the Gate to Manaborn, then Castle Garenbrig is an untapped land, but we don't have any basics here either, although we do have Fierce Empath that can shoot a Generous End to find a basic, so this hand does need a bit of help off this Once Upon a Time, but I think I can keep this because we do have access to a basic off the Fierce Empath as an out to Blood Moon, and outside of that we do have just a reasonably good start. You know, we've got Natural Order, we got Empath. If we can find an Arboreal Grazer off this Once Upon a Time, that's going to be providing us with some really good acceleration. So again, I am a little bit concerned about Blood Moon, but we do have Empath to find Generous End, and if we can find an Arboreal Grazer or a Kami off this Once Upon a Time, that's going to be absolutely huge as well. So lead on the Once Upon a Time, and don't hit a Kami or Grazer, which would have been the ideal hit, but we do find a Haywire Mite, so we do now have an out to Blood Moon, which is pretty important. So I think the clear take here is the Haywire Mite, which is what I go for. And then I'm going to lead on the Gate to Manaborn, which is pretty big, because then that means that Castle Garenbrig will be entering untapped as well, which is pretty nice. So next turn, this is kind of where I was a little bit off on Haywire Mite after this match, because if this Haywire Mite was something like a Boseiju, we wouldn't have had to potentially run it out into a removal spell. So putting these on a Thoughtseize, and I believe they take the Natural Order here, which I think is the right pick, especially because we have a Colney Garden. If they didn't have a removal spell for the Haywire Mite, I think them taking the Mite would probably be the better play, because us just having an out to Blood Moon on the board the entire game is obviously going to be a nightmare for them. So I think this turn I go Colney Garden into Haywire Mite, and I think we're kind of forced to play the Haywire Mite out here, because the nice thing about Mite is that we don't need to have a basic in play to be able to activate it. We just need to have a green mana available when the opponent's casting the Blood Moon, because obviously we can float the mana and then activate it afterwards. But the fact that we have to preemptively commit the Haywire Mite to the battlefield in order to do that is rough, because as you saw there, it just dies to Lightning Bolt, which is, you know, obviously not great at all. So I think going forwards, if I was going to dedicate a sideboard slot to a card to destroy Blood Moon, it would probably be more copies of Boseiju. So here we go for the Fierce Empath. Obviously drawing another land off the top is really rough here, and this was kind of a tough spot for me, because I was just thinking, okay, the Discipline take here is getting a Generous End to be able to fetch a basic to be able to play from under Blood Moon, but at this point when we've just drawn lands off the top and haven't found any gas, we might just have to get a Primeval Titan and hope they don't have a Blood Moon, because I feel like if they have a Blood Moon, you know, I was going to say we're probably not winning this game anyway, but the nice thing about this Titan deck against midrange is they don't close out the game particularly quickly, and we have a ton of really good top decks. So I think taking the Ent is definitely the correct play here, but I definitely understand why I was taking a long time thinking about this, because getting Primeval Titan, you know, even getting Generous Ent doesn't really give us a great way to play out from under Blood Moon, because we still need to find a Boseiju or, you know, another basic for a Natural Order in order to answer the Blood Moon. So I still think Generous Ent was probably the correct play here, but, you know, there's definitely the consideration to, can I afford to play around it? I mean, having said that, it didn't end up mattering at all, because the opponent went Jarsil into Thoughtseize. But we draw a Kami of Bambi Groves off the top, which is a really great draw here, because now we can just channel, get 2 basics, and then Blood Moon isn't really too much of a concern at all, because now we have access to all of our outs off this Kami. So I'm going to play the Bojuka Bog here just because it's it's a tap land, and we want to use this 3 mana for Kami, so might as well play the tap land now. And it also exiles the graveyard a little bit for, you know, reducing the amount of value they can get off future Jarsils. They unfortunately do have the Perilous Iteration though, which they can obviously flash back immediately off the Jarsil. But getting this Kami here is really huge, because now I feel like all of my top decks are live, even if they have Blood Moon, right? If they do have Blood Moon, then Natural Order into Titan of Industry is live, which is a really big way that we can completely turn this game around if they do have the Blood Moon. And then, you know, Primeval Titan's live, and they lead on the Inquisition here, which doesn't really do anything. But Now I feel in a really good spot, right? If I draw a Primeval Titan off the top, I think we're odds-on favourite to win from this point because we immediately get Field of the Dead online, which is pretty huge. If I draw Natural Order off the top, that's a Primeval Titan. Even if I draw Natural Order in a turn or two and they have Blood Moon, we can Natural Order into Titan of Industry. Now, the opponent does go for Lightning Bolt there, which does make me a little bit worried. They just have another removal spell that will then cut us off of Natural Order. And we don't draw a Titan, but we do draw once upon a time that I'm really hoping can draw us into a Titan. Unfortunately, we don't find that, but we do find a Grazer, which is, a reasonably nice pickup because it now means that even if they have a single removal spell, we'll have another creature in place so that something like another Natural Order will be live, right? They would need 2 removal spells to cut us off the Natural Order. So here I'm going to put the Temple Garden into play and the basic Forest. We want to make sure that we put at least one of the basics in place so that if they do go Blood Moon and we draw Natural Order, we can just play Natural Order next turn regardless. A Natural Order into Titan of Industry is big. Even just drawing Field of the Dead here would be reasonable because we get it online immediately, start producing tokens, which is going to be difficult for them to fight past because this particular version of Jund isn't running the One Ring, right? Their main top-end cards are Lalia and Minskambu in order to try and snowball the game in their favour. So I do feel like Field of the Dead just as a generic land would be reasonable here, but we got a lot of good top decks. So they go for Tarmogoyf, which is a 6/7, and then Blood Moon as well, which again is an issue for sure, but we have a lot of good draws here. We can hit Natural Order, which is the main one, right? Natural Order into Titan of Industry would just flip this game completely. Primeval Titan actually wouldn't be that good of a draw here now because we wouldn't get any of the Field of the Dead triggers, and we can't actually attack with the Primeval Titan because Tarmogoyf is a 6/7. Which is obviously a concern. Now they discard the Lalia to the Perilous Iteration and get to bring it back straight away the following turn with this Jarsel here. So now we're on the back foot and we don't really have too many turns to draw out of this. So I'm going to block the Tarmogoyf because we really don't want to afford to take 6 damage. But I'm not going to block the other 2 because I want Natural Order to be a live draw here, right? Natural Order is the way we win here, and if we block with just an extra Grazer, then Natural Order, then they can just use like another Lightning Bolt to take out the other Grazer, and Natural Order is no longer a live draw. So we do draw the Sylvan Scrying here, which does provide us an out to Blood Moon, which then makes Primeval Titan a good top deck. So I'm going to Sylvan Scrying for Beseiju here. And then, yeah, like I said, if we can Beseiju the Blood Moon here, then Primeval Titan is a good draw because then we can stabilize with Field of the Dead tokens. Again, Natural Order is still a really good draw here. So just got to hope to draw well. I mean, we did get kind of unlucky with the top decks, and I feel like this matchup, especially with them running a lot of discard spells, does often come down to how well we can top deck. So this is kind of rough here because we're forced to block the Tarmogoyf with the Grazer, which then means that Natural Order is no longer a good top deck. So that Sylvan Scrying draw really needs to be something better for us to get back into this game because now, our best draw is... I don't even know what our best draw is. Primeval Titan doesn't get the job done. But then they have 2 more Blood Moons, which is kind of a bit of a rub-in, right? Beseiju basically does nothing for us now. So this game, looks kind of one-sided, but there were quite a few turns where if I'd top decked a Titan or a Natural Order, we would have been able to, completely flip the game on its head. But, it goes like that sometimes. Nicole did play really well and ended up taking the whole event down. So I'm still really happy with how this event went. Deck felt really strong.